So I've totally figured out what's actually going on now, and people need to start talking about this actually. They're talking about a lot of other things, but this is the thing, the government are just carrying on as if, nothing's out of place, as if there's nothing wrong, right? And ignoring it. Now, I actually believe now that the whole lockdown thing was definitely planned, but, people are arguing that it was planned for different reasons. I think it was planned to get the fact that everyone's going to be opposed to what the government are doing. Generally, Tony Blair's plan, which Keir Starmer definitely is trying to follow through on, right? And the fact that there was going to be so much opposition on social media and so much actual complaints to the government that they didn't want to actually have to, prorogue the parliament or shut the parliament down, right? So what they did is they had that pandemic lockdown scare thing and they did shut everything down, right? But then it turned out later to be a load of tosh and a hoax, right? So, and if you remember, Boris Johnson did prorogue Parliament and then it all turned out to be not lawful, right? So that was done in order to, when it come to the crunch later on, when the public want the government to be shut down or to be prorogued or stopped from doing this like Starmer's doing now, we'd already had that, right? We'd already had, government being shut down and then everyone being annoyed with it, so people wouldn't support it being shut down or they wouldn't want it to be prorogued, right? That's my opinion. Now, the Human Rights Act is a major part in all this, right? And I've just actually come to realise this more recently, right? Now, this is actually all about foreign threats and, like Graham Moore's been talking about the 1700 Act of Settlement. I'll probably put a video that Graham Moore has just done the other day in the link, but also there's a video with Nick Clegg and Mark Zuckerberg. Now, I'll put that link in there, but Nick Clegg and Mark Zuckerberg were talking about the fact that, the government hadn't been keeping up with legislation and the digital platforms had just been doing what the hell they wanted, right, without the government properly keeping up with legislation. But that also was allowed to be done because Clegg was in charge of Facebook, right? He was also the deputy prime minister, and then you had Lord Allen of Hallam. Now, all these people are in charge of these non-departmental government bodies now, like Ofcom, they're on the board, things like that. Now, they never wanted to legislate on the platforms. Now, they've made it look like they do now because they've just put the Online Safety Act into effect, but that was only made in 2023. That was way after the pandemic, right? And they've just blocked out all the adult sites, and made it so you've got to put biometrics in, and then they're doing that with the company's house. If you've got a company that you're wanting to try and enforce biometrics and things like that, they're doing it in a few different ways. Now, this is the thing, right? This guy here, Ken McCallum, who's meant to be in charge of MI5, right? He supposedly said that a couple of MPs had leaked some information to China and that, he wanted to prosecute because China's a threat. Now, the Crown Prosecution Service discontinued the prosecution and said that China is not a threat to the UK, right? Now, I don't know whether this Ken McCallum guy is telling the truth or not, whether he did think it was a threat or whether he is going along with this whole plan. But it is this, and you've also got that Michael O'Flaherty, who's meant to be the head of the European Convention on Human Rights, okay? Now, that O'Flaherty's just written a letter to Shabana Mahmood saying that, the government had been legislating over the human rights. Now, Suella Braverman and the Tories now have got this idea into their head that they want to scrap the Human Rights Act, okay? Because apparently there was a court case what said that, all foreigners and aliens have got the same rights as us. Well, they don't have all the same rights as us. They're not allowing them to open petitions and start petitions on the government website, only if you live in the territories, right? They don't have the same rights as us. The Human Rights Act in 1998, the legislation part of it, which is made for this European Convention on Human Rights. It's got public authorities versus Parliament. In section 6 on public authorities, there's a distinction and difference between acts done for public authorities or on behalf of them and of Parliament, because when you lay in a bill before Parliament or a petition, you're acting in a process to get legislation made or changed, right? Which is where you're pursuing petitioning, collecting signatures and advertising it is like doing a private bill to Parliament. So they said that, acts of public authorities are separate to Parliament, which is why the Lady Chief Justice was annoyed, because they decided that the Judicial Conduct Investigation Office was under freedom of information and had to comply with the freedom of information, right? She didn't really want to have to comply with the freedom of information, but they decided that it was a public authority, right? That's tied into it as well. But this is the thing, right? Suella Braverman and the Tories now have come up with this ridiculous notion that, the Human Rights Act is getting in the way, right? It's the thing that is wrong that we need to get rid of, right? Only because of immigration. They're using this because of this immigration, because of this court case. But, right, there's hardly been that many important court cases, and that's the problem. The thing is, the government are trying to pretend and make out that, because of this court case with immigration and foreigners here, that the whole Human Rights Act needs to be scrapped, right? When actually they're full of absolute tosh, lies and nonsense. They're completely and utterly they themselves are putting legislation through government which is going against the Human Rights Act. So it's they themselves which are doing it. They're trying to make out, but there was a court decision that, foreigners have got the same rights as humans, right? But that was a court decision, right? The problem is that it's the MPs themselves who are completely disregarding the Human Rights Act and ignoring it and making up acts which go against it. So I don't know why they're complaining about the courts making decisions that say, in relation to it, when it's them, the MPs, who are putting laws through, including the Conservatives. Now, just for example, all those laws to do with, practicing religion and praying in public in certain places, that definitely violates the right to practice a religion. And then you've got the Labour Party now is putting, loads of laws through, like you can have an abortion at any age, or you can, all these assisted suicide acts and so forth. But all these are against the right to life. And there are really important arguments about that, which you get into separately, right? The right to life. So I think that they're legislating against these things on purpose, because they never actually... Tony Blair didn't actually make the Human Rights Act to ever intend to enforce it. All of those articles in the Human Rights Act are completely and totally against the European Convention on Human Rights. All those articles of the Convention of Human Rights, sorry, let me just rephrase that. All those articles of the Convention of Human Rights are totally against Tony Blair's digital ID plan. And it's not just Tony Blair's digital ID plan, it's his whole Fabian Group and Society, it's the whole corporate entities and companies, it is Starmer and the Tories and the Lib Dems, because, Nick Clegg was in charge of the Lib Dems, and he was Deputy Prime Minister, and then he was in charge of Facebook Global President. Now, all these articles, the freedom of expression definitely has been legislated against, over, and this freedom of assembly, which, okay, I'll give Michael O'Flaherty credit. He's complained to the government, he's complained to Shabana Mahood that they were legislating against those articles, right? But it's not just that freedom of assembly. Why isn't someone writing to them to say they're legislating against the articles with the right to life? Why isn't somebody written them to say they're legislating against the articles, like in Scotland, the freedom to say what you want in your own house, expression at home? Now, definitely, there's no doubt they've been putting acts of law in and making up stupid and ridiculous offences which totally and utterly go against those articles. Now, if this is because this is where the big lie of the government is. The big lie of the government currently at this moment in time is that it's the Human Rights Act's fault. It is the reason for immigration. No, they're just big fibbers. There's never been as big a fib or lie. They are totally disregarding and in utter contempt of the Human Rights Act articles themselves, all parties, all the three main parties and all the MPs. Starmer's got absolutely no respect or care for it, or else he won't be doing these assisted dying and suicide and abortion acts put through. And his party, who all have to vote the same way. The Tories completely and totally disregarded it with all these ridiculous offences like what, Priti Patel's doing and freedom of assembly. And that's, O'Flaherty's written to them and complained, right? But this is the thing. I've realised now that the most important article, when I've actually looked through these articles and read them, because I was more into the provisions of the Act, like section 6, 7 and 8. I never really advocated those articles because they're so vague, right? Because the articles are so, like YouTube policy, they're so vague that, and it was so obvious that legislation was being made totally against them that I couldn't take those articles seriously because there was absolutely no way that the government were even having any intention to, make law which complied with them. Now, and it's that which is the main point. But let me just say that, right, there's this privacy of family, right, the right to privacy of family, which I think is Article 8, right? It's absolutely clear now, it's an absolute fact, and this has happened in a very short time since probably around 2005, because before 2005 you just had your own website, or you went on these internet forums, okay, and you just talked on internet forums and sent each other private messages, right? Since 2005 onwards, mainly since the BBC announced to everyone that there was going to be this Facebook thing and you should go on it, and since the YouTube and Google was just we're a little bit more than a search engine now, so since Google took off, right, and since they've started having all these policies like submit, consent, accept, agree to the policies, and then other websites suddenly started having these same policies, and then that term appeared, accept cookies, right? And then all these accept, submit, consent, agree, comply policies which you give up, that's effectively giving up your rights. Well, they can't give you constitutional rights, but YouTube, Google have, because they've been taking down content which is constitutionally protected, right? So they've been overriding our laws, and mainly because of that American online, the American the Digital Online Decency Act in America, 1996 one, this Section 230, which is purely in America, right? It's purely in American law. It takes away constitutional rights, but not in England. But those platforms have been overreaching the law in England, right? And that MI5 did nothing. And that's actually a major political threat. So Ken McCallum, it has failed to take legal action against Facebook and YouTube and Google, right? In fact, Google had been invited into the country, to do another 6 million or billion project, right? So that American Online Decency Act, the English one, they're enforcing it, but the American one, the CDA, right? It's the CDA 1996, Section 230. That actually is a foreign threat, right? It doesn't matter whether we're allies with America or not. It's a foreign threat against our democracy, and it's been actively obstructing democracy and taking things down, right? So that McCallum needs to act against Facebook or YouTube. I don't think he's going to, and the reason for that is that it was the BBC that told everyone to go on Facebook, Google have been kind of welcomed and invited to expand, right? Clegg was in charge of Facebook, and then the government website, Parliament, are actively advertising, promoting and encouraging people to use all these platforms, right, which have got all these consent, submit and accept policies, right, or they're advertising them on the website. Now, this Online Safety Act has just come into effect, but suddenly all of the platforms are complying with it, right? Notice all these platforms are suddenly complying with this Online Safety Act and blurring out, adult things and that. But all these websites aren't even based in England. And how can they be prosecuted when they're not even based in England? So why would they have to comply with it? I don't know, And this is to do with servers and hard drives and servers being located in different countries or multiple countries. But this is the thing, for the English election law, you weren't really supposed to be using servers and equipment and devices out of England because, why would you? All of the websites were English ones and forums, and they didn't have anything to do with foreign countries for elections. But now, all of the parliamentary websites are mixing their own content with their campaign stuff, which is under totally two separate laws, and then they're advertising their campaigns on their parliamentary pages, and it's all a complete and total mess, right? And you've got foreign interference like Wikipedia and foreign people going on Facebook and YouTube making comments on English election pages, on English politicians' pages. And then you've got the legal side of it, where they've had this online, the CDA 1996, Section 230, is actually also enforced, coming over into English law, because it took down David Davis MP, one of his videos, right? But also into the election law, because you can't use like the Obscene Publications Act. And then their policy is overreaching into UK election videos and law anyway, because the policies aren't even law. The policies are just something they're getting you to agree to, which further encroaches on your rights, particularly political rights and elections, right? Which we're not even really supposed to be on there. But when I found out that Wikipedia was getting edited and messed around with, but then you've got Manchester Police have been acting against Paul Golding, so the police as well. But I don't want to try and confuse matters, right? Just let me try and... Now, there's a few things to think about, write those down or draw them out on what those things actually mean as a piece to this whole puzzle, right? But this is actually important now, because all those policies from these platforms, which are making you consent, submit, accept to them, using your data, looking at your data, actually assessing you, doing weird experiments and tests on you, and all these type of things, right, which you don't have a choice to, because you're forced to submit, consent, and accept, and then they're taking over and buying most of the websites and big companies, like they were doing with BlackRock, and Google and, Zuckerberg are having more and more big websites. Notice that there's never been as many music artists ever in the world, as much creativity. Yeah, you'd have thought, well, there's never been as many platforms in the world, but everyone's only really using, Mark Zuckerberg's platforms and Google's, right? How is that? How are they not, the really popular platforms that don't have these policies, consent, submit, accept, and so forth? Like, they've got Rumble, but Rumble's still full of rubbish adverts that are really annoying, right? And a lot of them are forcing people to put up with these adverts, which are really annoying people and upsetting them. And it's the actual framework for the adverts. And, the Advertising Standards Authority aren't going to take Google to court for spamming the whole internet with adverts and upsetting people, right? Even though all the complaints they've got probably amount to that verdict, right? They only want to act on case by case on adverts. And this is the thing, right? The adverts, when you complain, they never do anything. It's taken Ofcom. I think they've had about 77,000 complaints to act against GB News on, some of the content that GB News people find offensive, right? 77,000 comments. It's almost like, you've got to petition these non-departmental government agencies for them to do anything. But this is the thing, right? And the non-departmental government agencies are a really important key thing in this, because they're taking on most of the complaints that the police would normally act on, right? You've got illegal or harmful adverts for the advertising standards. Then you've got, misbehaving or misconduct of lawyers and solicitors. You've got the Solicitors Regulation Authority and bar standards. Then you've got Ofcom for anything on TV and radio, right? And then you've got the Electoral Commission. You report things to them, and people are reporting less to the police. Well, Graham Moore reported to the police, they didn't do anything. I reported to the police, they didn't do anything about that Runcorn Helsby by-election. He's having to do it himself and raise the money after we're paying for the Electoral Commission. So the Electoral Commission aren't really acting when it comes to electoral issues. They say that they're not doing it wrong, so we're having to prosecute ourselves. So they're soaking up absolutely massive amounts of money, these non-department government agencies, but they're not doing anything. You're effectively having to try and petition them with 100,000 signatures or 100,000 complaints for them to do anything. They're just sat there literally not taking any action in anything. Now, you might say, well, they are taking action in some things. Yeah, what, like, the advertising standards in a fake jelly, blood jelly thing. I found, like, a brain which was immersed in fake blood. That's got to be worse than blood jelly. I sent it into them. I actually sent the sampling, Yeah, I don't think they acted on it. So it's... Now, this is the thing. These non-departmental government agencies who are now meant to be enforcing and governing, they're not taking action. And they themselves have got all these policies and administration policies which are similar to these big corporate companies, right? Like the Petitions Committee, when they're rejecting AFA's petitions and not acting on them yet, that policy can't be lawful. It goes against the standing orders of Parliament, and it deprives it of its actual true function, right? Now, those type of policies, what the e-Petitions Committee have got, have been implemented into all of these departments like Ofcom, advertising standards, Electoral Commission. Most of these agencies probably, and they're not acting. In fact, these policies just try to prevent them from acting, just like with the e-Petitions Committee, right? Very similar. Now, this is the thing. We've got these human rights articles, okay? Now, the human rights articles, they're meant to protect people, okay? But the government, mysteriously, have just been making up laws which totally go against those articles. The MPs have been doing it. The ministers, the House of Commons have been putting legislation through which, and totally ignoring those articles, like on expression, freedom of assembly, the right to your privacy. Well, actually, the right to your privacy, that's the one they haven't legislated on, except now they've just come out with the Online Safety Act. But this is a thing in that Nick Clegg and Mark Zuckerberg video. Nick Clegg's moaning, going, oh yeah, the government haven't kept up with these platforms, rushed ahead. But they wanted us to rush ahead. They wanted the platforms to rush ahead because they wanted them to implement all these accept cookies, submit consent, accept, spy on our privacy, force us to assess all our digital information and everything and us to get used to it and have a digital ID on Facebook so that we could all be primed for Tony Blair's digital ID thing, right? There was absolutely no intention whatsoever. Otherwise, Clegg and Parliament would have said, this is really, really serious, this, right? They're making all our citizens submit consent and accept, and they're giving up their privacy, but they're forcing them to give up their privacy. So that's against Article 8 of the Human Rights Act. So why didn't the government go, oh, this is really serious, right? Now, O'Flaherty has just written to the government in that similar vein with the right to assembly and said to Shabana Mahmood, why are you legislating, why is legislation, going too far? Which is what needs to be said with, the right to life as well and the freedom of expression, but also the right to privacy. Now, the government have allowed all these main big platforms and encouraged them and even advertised them on its website. Facebook, the BBC advertised it, Google, right, YouTube, all these platforms. if they would have legislated against it, right, like they've done with the Online Safety Act, for kids, but that's only just come, at the last minute now, it's too little too late, really, then they wouldn't have been able to gather all the data on us, assessors, profilers, assessors for God knows what under the sun, strengths, weaknesses, health, all these profiles of the public, personal information, what your political allegiances are, all, what have you got on your phone, and using it to reflect adverts against you and, annoy you and wind you up and all this, right? That should have been legislated against when Nick Clegg was in government, right? And the fact that Parliament have not legislated against that, but they've just done the Online Safety Act, and they're still... How is it that the Online Safety Act with the adult content clause has just come into effect, but nothing in the Online Safety Act has actually stopped them from forcing us to submit consent and accept all these spyware and stalking things? And why is it that all these really annoying, upsetting adverts are being shown to us, which are causing daily distress to many people? Why don't they legislate against that? They've got their Advertising Standards Authority, but they're doing nothing. Guy Parker's not doing anything, right? And if they did, then all these big businesses would not be making as much money on the platforms without the annoying ads, but it wouldn't spam the internet. And, Google wouldn't be coming into England, going, hey, we're going to invest, 6 billion or 6 million, whatever here, because, they wouldn't be, that would poo-poo their big advertising plan, which Neil Mohan has just made the entire platform completely non-user friendly. Some chaotic, absolute, ridiculous menu system, which isn't good for anything. He's just showing off, trying to do all these ridiculous floaty screen nonsense, spoiler buttons, right? It would dramatically have, or take 2/3 off the top of Google and Facebook's profits if the British government did that and poo-poo its plans to integrate it into the old digital ID and evaluating and spying us, which is Tony Blair's mechanism of implementation. So the cheek that the government have got, the absolute cheek that the government have got to say now, the Online Safety Act, Suella Braverman's like, put a hand up, Maximus the Merciful, well, he was somebody shouts it out in a crowd, then everyone starts going along with it, right? It's like a gladiator, someone, Cyril Braverman's like, puts a little hand up in a crowd, we need to get rid of the Online Safety Act, and everyone's like, we need to get rid of the Online Safety Act. No, they never, ever, ever intended that, sorry, not Online Safety Act, the Human Rights Act 1998, right? But, so Suella Braverman's like, we need to get rid of the Online Safety Act, right? Oh, why did I just say that? The Human Rights Act 1998. Suella Braverman's saying to get rid of the Online Safety Act. God, something's happened here. My mind's just merged together the Online Safety Act and the Human Rights Act 1998, mainly because it's just highly relevant. I don't know why that is. I can't say Suella Braverman and the Human Rights Act 1998. It just comes out as the Online Safety Act. At least I'm aware that I'm doing that. Right. Suella Braverman, the Human Rights Act 1998. She put a call out. She put a hand up and went, hey, we need to get rid of this, because of using immigration as the reason, right? Apparently because it gives up all our rights, but it doesn't. It's absolute nonsense. It doesn't give up all our rights at all. And the fact that her and the Tories are now saying they want to scrap it, the Parliament have completely disregarded it themselves, right? And put loads of legislation through which completely and totally goes against it. They're totally allowing these foreign entities to completely override it and ignore it. And the important thing is that they're blaming this immigration thing but they're not blaming the immigration thing on themselves. They're not blaming the immigration problem with the Human Rights Act. They're not blaming themselves for, making up ridiculous legislation. O'Flaherty is now blaming them, right, for legislating against the Human Rights Act. But they're blaming on the courts. They're blaming the Human Rights Act on this court decision that decided that, everyone who comes into England has got the same rights, okay? Now, this is the thing. They set it up so that if any acts of law were found in court to be in contravention of the human rights, then a judge can put this report through and do this motion to try and get MPs to do something about it or amend the law, right? But they're putting all these brand new laws through which completely, totally go against it and disregard it anyway, right? Now, they might have probably thought about it, if it's older laws are against it. And they were planning on the judges, when any of the older legislation pops up which is against it, then put reporting. But, what is the judge going to do? Put reporting against the 1688 Bill of Rights, but none of the Crown prosecutors or police want to admit that we're using the 1688 Bill of Rights. So, chance would be a fine thing, because then they're in contempt. But, if they were trying to put it through, to get the courts to say that 1688 Bill of Rights is incompatible with human rights, but they can't do that because there's a distinction between the public authorities and Parliament, and the actual courts are only the public authorities, right? And they're not allowed to do anything in the parliamentary stuff. Or else you couldn't have a Parliament, right? You wouldn't have a Parliament, but they've still got the European Parliament, and it doesn't seem to be affecting the European Parliament's rights. Now, this is it. I hope I haven't confused matters. I'm trying not to confuse matters because it is a little bit complicated, but it's not too much complicated if you draw it out. It's just that I've been throwing a lot of examples in, and maybe that might have been confusing things because I've just been throwing in a few more recent developments. But I'll try and essentially put the model. I'll try and put a little basic model now so we can see what's happening. So, okay, it is the newer acts of law which they're making after they make the Human Rights Act 1998, which are actually breaking that Human Rights Act 1998. In fact, they're putting through more legislation that goes against the articles than I think older legislation. But they made it so if anyone wants to challenge it, or if it comes out in legal cases that there's a problem, then these judges make these reports. But they haven't been, right? There was the only court case has been, mysteriously, is really this one which affects immigration. Notice, we're being completely and totally bombarded and inundated with illegal immigrants, right? Due to these wars and conflicts and obviously strategies against us. And that is the one they're focusing on because of the court case. Yet, this is a thing. Where was a court case about Mark Zuckerberg, YouTube and Facebook encroaching on our privacy from Article 8? Where are the court cases for that, right? You'd have thought that's more important to national security, right, of England, because they're American foreign platforms, right? And where are the court cases about freedom of expression or challenging that law in Scotland, and and the right to life? We're not seeing these court cases. Now, this is the thing, although that legislation, they've been working on it, this session, right, or the last session for those the ones that violate the right to life. But this is the thing. The only way that they've put this mechanism in for the courts to complain and raise a challenge, which they should be doing now about all these new laws that have been put through, right, is that if it comes out in a case. Now, this is the thing, right? Firstly, a lot of the power to actually act legally has been delegated to all these non-departmental government bodies, right? So if you're going to get any legal action, which is ever going to end up in a court and challenge anything, it's going to be through these non-departmental government agencies, usually like Electoral Commission, Advertising Standards Authority, Solicitors Regulation, Bar Standards, Ofcom, right? Now, all those aren't taking legal action. In fact, they're bottlenecking legal action, and it's taking them, to get up to 77,000 complaints in order to act on anything. Just like the e-petitions committee are rejecting, over 3/4 of the complaints, right? And then they're all under these administrative law policies where you can't negotiate or argue with them, right? Very, very strict regimes like Ofcom, right, when you ring them up. And all these policies have been thought by these think tanks, which are the same type of policies that the private corporate entities are under, like YouTube itself and Facebook, right? And then a lot of they're getting us to self-govern, right? By administrative controls, and then we're under administrative controls. So a lot of issues that you have with people, you never go to the police and complain because you just use tools, so it never gets into court, right? And then when there are any issues with the platforms themselves, not people on the platforms, but the platform model or owners like Mark Zuckerberg or Sergey Brin and Google or Neil Mohan, right? They're enforcing their own platforms, but they never take you to court. So if they're breaking human rights articles, it doesn't come out in court because they've been set up not to go to court, right? And no one takes them to court because in America they've got that CDA 1996, which says that, they're not treated as, when it comes to copyright and things like that, they aren't treated as a party, right? And therefore, you're not going to get into court with these people unless you bring a private case. Now, the police are not going to act against the platforms. I can guarantee you that. If you ring the police up and say, we arrest Mark Zuckerberg, they're just going to laugh at you and put the phone down, right? Or Sergey Brin or Google, right? The police will act against the platforms. They're too big and important, and the MPs are advocating them on their websites. The police are only acting through citizens' complaints about things on the platforms, right? Now, so no one's actually, and then, well, why don't we use civil law and go against these big platforms? But who can afford it? The solicitors are so expensive now, they're so out of the price range that no one can afford them, right? So you aren't going to get into court against the big platforms, and most of the issues like, copyright are being dealt with by that CCB thing, which is based in America, right? And it doesn't even operate under English law, and it definitely doesn't have like Human Rights Act violations, right? So you're not going to get into court with a situation where the judge is going to raise whether these platforms are violating our those articles to make a representation to the government. And you're not going to do it with adverts annoying you, because you just complain to Advertising Standards, who are doing sweet FA. They got, just like, Ofcom had 77,000 complaints and did, absolutely nothing about GB News, right? Similar thing. So you're not going to get Ofcom Advertising Standards or Ofcom acting against the platforms because the advert mechanism itself is annoying, intrusive, causing anxiety to people or whatever, right? So because of their strategy and because of how they've separated everything off into these departmental government bodies, agencies, and because the police won't act against anything that's, bigger than a thumbnail, they're only like, going after ruffians in the street, right? They won't do anything about these big companies or anything. Have you tried complaining to that? There's that website, not Crime Stoppers. Basically, if there's any complaints against any administrative crimes, it's supposed to go to a particular website and the police won't take it on. That's part of the strategy as well, because a lot of these crimes and offences, like particularly like if it's against the articles of the Human Rights Act, it's considered like these white collar crimes or other crimes. It's not like ruffian crime, right? So the police will act, and that the police have been made so you don't really ring up the police and speak to them about any office or high level type crimes. They've got that weird agency they've got is very secretive and strange. They never act on complaints. Effectively, they're under these policies as well, which is similar to taking Ofcom up to 77,000 complaints to act. Now, if you were in the 1800s, and Mike Graham or Ofcom did something which you thought was illegal, then you just go down to the sheriff office, put 50 quid on the table, get a warrant and get me arrested and go prosecute the cunt, right? That's it, done. One complaint, right? And then if you win, or you're done. And that's it. But it's taken 77,000 people to actually try to effectively petition Ofcom to do something, right? Taking 77,000 people of complaints. It's actually got to the point where you're having to effectively lobby or petition these non-departmental government agencies to act, right? Not like, if one of them did something wrong, you just go straight to the police station and get them arrested, right? Or prosecute them, and you put the money on the table, right? And get it done. That's it, done, right? So we're actually, and then they wanted to get rid of the juries as well now. That figures into it as well. So we're actually, what these non-department government agencies are now, these kind of like operating on these corporate style policies. They're obstructing, really, bottlenecking back 77,000 complaints at a time on any given thing, when it should only take one complaint for the police, to act in the past, in prehistory. Now it's taking 77,000 complaints for them to act on one thing, right? Like, with, Mike Graham or whatever in GB News. So this mechanism that the government set up, hey, we'll have so the judges, can report these violations. Now that was put into the criminal procedure rules in 2005, right? So the judges can report it, but they're not really doing. And as the government are making more and more things against those articles, then it's getting ridiculous. So I don't know how the hell that case got into the court. I think it was actually the foreigners who brought it. I don't know where these foreign people, these immigrants who have hardly got any money, get their money from. But I think they brought the case. They complained. I don't know what lawyer they got. I don't know how they got to form a body, because I'm in England, right? I'm ill at the moment. I'm not working at the moment, right? And I can't get a pro bono or, Joyland Morham or any of, you ring these people up, no win, no fee, or and none of them actually want to do anything. And then, obviously they've got no capacity. So I really don't know how some of these other people are getting. The thing is that, I've got a very clear idea of what needs to be done and give directions, and they don't like that. A lot of these people who manage to, get cases done, either it's a completely wrong thing, like, with Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil, all these cases, and they're just doing the wrong thing, right? Roger Hallam got put in prison just for, this apparently public nuisance, but it wasn't a private act. It was on behalf of a public action to the Parliament, that's like under the Riots Act. So there's a hell of a lot of legal cases being done which are wrong, the wrong law, the wrong claim, and really fruitless. But yet these private companies have been making absolutely hundreds of thousands of pounds out of it and milking us all, right? So the situation is, we're not going to get a case raised in a court against all the platforms, because, who's going to get the money? And this is the ironic thing. A load of foreign people who don't live in the country managed to get into the High Court in a case that they've got rights in England against human rights. But people who actually live in England who are English don't seem to be able to get the money together for a court case to claim that, the right to life's been taken, to claim that all these platforms are violating our privacy on Article 8, to claim that all these adverts that Google and Facebook are putting up are annoying. The framework is harassment and stalking, right? Now, in order to do that, you need to raise some money. Now, the ironic thing is that loads of people are fundraising. I can't believe how many people are fundraising now. Graham Moore's fundraising. Stop ULEZ have got 2 or 3 fundraising cases. You've got everyone, all of these big platforms, Big Brother, are raising money. Like Big Brother's doing, court cases against digital ID, right? But they don't seem to be able to come together and communicate properly in order for it to sink in and click that, hey, just a minute, right? Why don't we just do like those foreign people did who said, hey, we've got rights in England. Why don't, all the, if a lot of foreign people can somehow get money together or get a lawyer or get free pro bono together to challenge the whole of England that, they've got the same rights as English people in England, right? Under human rights. Why can't all the people in England who are throwing all these monies at these fundraisers seem to click and go, hey, why don't we do that, with, the right to life? Why don't we do that with, the advertisements on the platforms? Why don't we do that with all these, spyware, Trojans, consent, submit and accept? Why aren't the Scottish people doing that, for the freedom of expression and freedom of speech in Scotland, right? But this is the thing. Suella Braverman wants to scrap those articles now. Suella Braverman wants to scrap that act so it doesn't exist. But this is the thing. That act will actually stop Tony Blair's plan. That act is meant to stop Tony Blair's plan and prevent it and all these platforms from getting us information and spamming us with these ads and saying what we want. But Tony Blair's the person who didn't the Labour Party come up with the Human Rights Act in 1996, between then and 2000, right? And, there are other things Tony Blair's done when it comes to, the judicial system and, the judge's oath and giving, confessions in exchange for justice, information and confessions in exchange for favours from judges, lots of things like that. So now, why does it affect MI5? Well, this is the thing, right? MI5, and I probably need to make a better video that's more clear about this because I'm understanding now that it's all a bit random and scattered and some people won't make sense out of it. Maybe I need to draw it out on paper. But Ken McCallum, right, he's actually been engaged and acted because apparently, 2 MPs did this or that, leaked some information out, right? And yet, he's saying, China could be a threat to England, right? But then the CPS started a prosecution and they said that it wasn't. Now, either Ken McCallum's lying, right? And China's not a threat, and it's all propaganda, a pandemic, sort of propaganda, when there wasn't actually really anything that wrong, didn't necessitate all that, right? Or McCallum does think that China's a threat. But this is the thing. America, currently, at this point now, as we speak, American persons, namely Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin and his other mate, which I keep forgetting his name, but he's managing to escape. He may remain anonymous, or not anonymous, but just not mentioned, right? Sergey Brin and Neil Mohan, who's working under Sergey Brin, right, and Zuckerberg, they are, as we speak, the biggest and most serious violation of the Human Rights Act as we speak now under Article 8. Because it is a threat to the privacy of the people of England, right? And they're using force and coercion to make you give up that right. You've got no other choice or option, right? And therefore, surely the privacy of the English people is a security issue, particularly when it's Americans who actually take that privacy away or force us to give it up, right? It's the biggest violation of those articles. But it's required for Tony Blair's mechanisms of implementation and digital ID plan, which the government are now implementing, starting with Companies House, and they're promoting and advertising those platforms on their website, right? And it was the BBC who, said create a digital identity on Facebook anyway. The BBC's under the government, part joint to the government, right? And the other ironic thing to this is that the guy who's running Facebook, who the BBC promoted and who the BBC told everyone to create a digital identity on his platform, and Google and Sergey Brin is investing loads of money in this country, billions, and yet the government haven't intervened. We're not going to get them into court because no one can afford to, and the police won't act, and most of the situations where you get them into court are being dealt with by these non-department government agencies who won't act, even if you get up to 77,000 complaints, right? Or it takes them up to 77,000 complaints, and that's just an example. I'm not saying that's every case, but that's one example, right? Complaints against GB News, right? So we're not going to get into court to raise this Article 8 violation by YouTube Google, because YouTube Google don't need to take us to court ever to get in there, because they're just actually bossing us with this policy where it never gets to court action, and that is a foreign action. And now I understand during the pandemic, there was all these things where the Americans were taking down English stuff and English were taking down American stuff because they couldn't take down the political stuff of their own country, supposedly, right? And that's what Big Brother Watch investigated. But some of the English content got taken down by mistake, and they actually interviewed one of the people who was on that brigade of the 77th Brigade or 77th Battalion, whatever it's called, right? Now, that strategy is actually what YouTube and Google and Facebook are doing to England, because they're not in England, they're in America, and they're under American law. But what they're doing is they've implemented a policy which is, they're meant to give us our law in our country, but they're not, because that policy was completely going over the law for our political stuff, right? Which that MI5 should have acted against Facebook and YouTube for taking down our political content. Primarily, example is my video and channel, right? That is an English security threat from foreign platforms, and we don't have that CDA Act, Section 230 in England. They've got no right to do it. So if Ken McCallum does not actually act against Mark Zuckerberg, and Google for taking that type of content down, then he's ignoring threats to democracy. Now, I just reported it for political parties, which is extremely similar, right? And it looks like something sort of happened, because that those hate charities were going around editing information on candidates, right? Like, Paul Golding on Wikipedia, which is a foreign platform, right? That's foreign interference. But they'd also teamed up with Facebook. So Facebook was obstructing it, but it's an official platform. That's election offence, right? So, but that exactly what Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg was doing with that block thing, when you search for Paul Golding, who's going to be candidate in elections. But that's what Facebook have been doing, taking many groups down which were politically protected, and taking down, people's channels which have been used for political campaigns. That Ken McCallum was meant to act in that, right? Because it's a foreign platform taking it down, right? But for a lot of the election material, it's questionable whether the election material should have been on there in the first place, right? Now, the security threat, the political democracy clause is being violated. But also, in addition to that, these Article 8 violations are against the law of the Human Rights Act. But these American platforms are forcing, foreign American platforms are forcing and coercion English people into submitting consent in these policies which give up all those rights of the article. And the government is advocating and promoting those platforms. It's advertising them on its own platform, right? Now, that's absolutely disgusting, unacceptable, and it is a violation of national security of England because foreign entities, bodies, are forcing us to give up our Article 8 privacy and protection, right? So that is a foreign threat. Doesn't matter whether we're allies with them or not, it's a foreign threat, right? That is a foreign threat now as we speak. But this is the ironic thing. You know, how did foreign people manage to get into a court, manage to get money for a court when they haven't got any money because they're all, you know, illegal immigrants or, you know, war, they're all like, you know, they're all asylum seekers, right? Asylum seekers and illegal immigrants manage to either crowdfund or get some lawyer, probably one of Tony Blair's lawyers, I would have thought, like, yeah, you know, I'll do it, you know, Maximus Merciful, right? You know, probably Suella Braverman might have paid for it, right? Who knows? They managed to get hundreds of thousands of pounds, however much it was, and they managed to get a court hearing to say they're not even from this country, but under the Human Rights Act, they've got a right to be in this country, right? But yet, we don't seem to be able to get the money together, or, you know, Joy Lamorham is not going to fucking do it because he's obsessed with gender, right? We're not getting into court to say, hey, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin, foreigners are completely and totally invading this country illegally by forcing the citizens to give up their Article 8 rights, right? And that's not apparently a security threat, right? And, you know, wow. And by complete chance and coincidence, not. The government love it because they're actually hoping to integrate more and more with those platforms in this digital ID thing they're implementing with Companies House and, you know, and other. They're not just doing it through Companies House. They're making us do it on other government websites to integrate with those big platforms, and they're even wanting, you know, Jeff Bezos is wanting to get into the NHS and so forth as well, right? So, and how can Suella Braverman dare to complain that the foreign immigrants went to court, right, and won this case so they get treated like English people, when Suella Braverman is part of a government and voting in Parliament on all these right to life violations and freedom of speech violations. And they've just had the Online Safety Act come into effect, which is, you know, blocked all adult channels. But why isn't it blocked all these illegal policies which are giving up Article 8, right? Or freedom of speech. So I've never... the deceit, the traitorous behaviour of every single MP, and they're still going up in Parliament now. They're still standing there and pretending to have mature debate. So this is very, very serious, you know. All these things going on is very, very serious. And now the last thing that apparently can happen is we can prorogue Parliament because they're all criminals, get it shut down and just stop, right? Stop everything, because they've already gone through the motion of that to make sure that, we don't do that once we all figure out what the hell's going on, right? Which is, now that we're all starting to figure out what the hell's going on, we need to stop, right? We need to prorogue Parliament. We need to lock down the country, stop MPs from doing anything. But they knew that we were going to challenge them and all these things when we started to figure it out. So that's, I think, why they had the pandemic and lockdown, went through the motions of it and say, oh, yeah, that was all ridiculous. We can't do that again, right? We can't shut down the country again. We can't have a prorogation again because, Boris was incompetent and apparently it was legal. So they've been through all these motions of, hey, let's, shut everything down now by pretend. So then, when we really need to shut everything down, then we'll say, oh, no, we're not doing that again, right? Do you understand? So, the worst thing now that can happen, and even Ben Habib, who is actually going to be on our side and protect England, is now saying that, we need to get rid of the Human Rights Act only because it says that all the foreigners have the same right as people in England. Well, they don't. That was just one court case. Yet, that's the least of our problems. They're legislating against all those articles, like, the right to life, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and mainly the privacy clause. So, as far as I'm concerned, now, either Suella Braverman is thick, right? She's either completely and totally thick, or she's completely and totally in on it, right? Because there is no way on this planet Earth that Tony Blair ever intended for those human rights articles to ever amount to anything, because all of them obstruct his digital ID plan, right? And now Suella Braverman's calling it out. So Tony Blair couldn't have hoped or wished for anything. Tony Blair couldn't have had a bigger wish in the whole world than some war kicking off, loads of people piling over here on boats and immigration going wild, and the government flying them over on planes, in order for them to say, and then mysteriously all these immigrants managed to get themselves a lawyer, which is, near impossible to do when you haven't got any money, right? At that high level, unless, you live inside Joy Lamorne's pants, right? If you've got a little house inside Joy Lamorne's boxer shorts, then you're in, right? But you got to be a gender bender to do that, right? Unless you are a gender bender, right? Which is full in on all this absolutely insane, ridiculous nonsense, right? Then you're not going to get a free lawyer, right? You're not going to get pro bono. You're not going to get a lawyer unless you're a freak, right? Unless you're a weird gender bender. Or you want some weird, you want to completely and totally eradicate sex and gender. Like, there is no sex or gender anymore. In fact, you can just call yourself what you want. You can invent your own gender or whatever, right? So all these lawyers are not doing anything. In fact, all of the cases that we didn't want them to do, they're doing. And every case that's important, they're not doing. Instead, they're actually helping to infiltrate humanity. All these free pro bono lawyers helped, prove that everyone in the world's got the same rights as England, supposedly. I believe that, right? And then helping us, destroy the sexes and everything else. So while this is going on, the free lawyers, the pro bono ones, are actually helping the invasion of what it is to be a man or a woman, the invasion of what it is to be English, the invasion of everything. They might as well be working for Mark Zuckerberg. They might as well be working for Google. Joy Lamorne might as well have a contract with Google. He might as well be Google's lawyer. He might as well be Mark Zuckerberg's lawyer, right? Because, we're not getting anyone going into the High Court to say, hey, just a minute, all these adverts are harassing everyone, we can't have that. They're distressing people, they're not user-friendly, or, they're coercing everyone to take away our human rights. I don't know what's wrong with Joy Lamorne, right? There's something wrong with him. If he does not prioritise that, hey, just a minute, Article 8 says we've got a right to privacy, but these American platforms are getting it. Everyone in England, every single person, because remember, I think there's 60 million people in England who've got a mobile smartphone, right? They're getting everyone in England to give up their privacy. That means that the American private companies can know everything about in England, assess us all personally for strengths and weaknesses, assess us all for sports performance, assess us all. Look, right, if I was a foreign military army and I wanted to invade a country, right, wouldn't it be great if I could find out not only as much as I could about the English military or the English Parliament, which is basically effectively what this Ken McCallum is supposed to have acted because MPs gave up information about Parliament, right, to China. Forget giving up strategic military information to China or parliamentary information to China. We're currently, the whole country, every single person with a smartphone, right, has been forced without any choice, or else, they can't have a smartphone, and coerced to accept being assessed, spied on, profiled, tested, experimented on by American foreign mega companies, right? Now, that would be more information than Putin would dream of for invading England, because if you were an American army and you suddenly fell out with England and you were fighting the whole country and not just the military, like every single person in England, particularly when all of those people are going to be subscribed to the army and join the army, right? Get this, right? Let's say we fell out with America tomorrow, right? And we went to war with them, and everyone in England was subscribed to the army and had to sign up to the army, right? Hey, guess what? Look, facial recognition, drones flying over England, shooting at people, and guess what? Hey, look, there's Soldier. Look at Sally Diamont. We know Sally Diamont from Facebook. She's a soldier now. Sally Diamont can only run maximum speed of 23 mile an hour, and she can only hold it out for 6 seconds. Right? My drone's got 70% battery left. You can probably catch her now because she's going to run out of energy soon. She'll be tired, right? Or hey, she likes dollies, right? Hey, look, we'll flash a picture up of a dolly and see if she stops running for half a second or whatever it is. Maybe that's a bit to the extreme, but what I'm saying is, right, how about that battleship they had, that Navy battleship, when apparently they were all uploading stuff to porn sites, but they were in service, they were out at sea on a naval ship in service, and it was using their personal preferences and interests, right? So, what I'm saying is, if you have strategically studied every individual with a smartphone, 60 million people, and also done all this biometrics that Bezos wants to do, and he wants to take over the NHS, right? And we know what you like, we know what you don't like, we know who your friends are, and so forth, right? I mean, they could have a drone fly up to you, shooting at you, right, chasing you, and then if it's like if everyone's been prescribed to the army, right, and then let's say that they've done this on Doctor Who. The BBC must have thought this out, right? Because on Doctor Who, on that on the series that's just basically been on, right? I'm not remembering the name of the particular episode, but it's basically when there's a soldier and he gets blinded, right? And they've got these military people who are all chaplains, right? And they've got these robots which are driving around like a doctor ambulance robot, and it's got a digital screen on it, right? And it's showing pictures, and when the guy gets killed, he records a message for his daughter, right? So it's introducing personalization and emotion and family into the war scenario, right? So let's say all these drones that apparently China's making all these drones and it can send them over. Let's say all the drones had a screen on them, right, as well. So if the drones can identify people from facial recognition, and if the drones can chase people down, but they also might be able to play sounds or show recordings or show an image, right, as well. So it could show an image of someone's family, because we know who your family are, right? So if you've got half of England's prescribed, to war, and we're all in a bunker shooting at some drones, the drones could potentially identify people and, and flash up pictures of their family or play recordings of their family as a blackmail, or to intimidate or taunt them, or there are lots of possibilities and potentials, right? That's just like one example. But what I'm saying is, right, effectively, if your whole country gets prescribed and goes to war after previously being civilian, then, and if you go to war with a country like, America or China, then that country has got actually all the personal details, personal information, preferences, likes, dislikes on your army, all your soldiers, right? So at the moment, we're, going to be allies with America, but this is the thing with China, what information China are getting on as well. They've got TikTok, right? So China are doing it. But now apparently MCCALLUM, MCCALLUM claims that China was a threat, right? But then the Crown Prosecution Service says it wasn't a threat, right? But what about Russia? What about Russian websites? What about Russian social media? They don't seem to be big on it, right? This is a thing. But it could be any country. Now, this is the thing. Why are we... It goes against... The fact is, it goes against the Human Rights Article, the Article 8. Regardless of whether that scenario of the threat happened or not, it's to get that information, to obtain that information in the first place, whichever country it is, America or China or Russia, right? In order to get it, they've broken the law of the article, which is meant to be protecting us. And no one's got any pro bono or lawyer or anything to do sweet F.A. Nothing. Yet, a lot of illegal immigrants and asylum seekers who are meant to be absolutely have no money and poor have managed to nail themselves a lawyer who's actually ruled that they've got the same rights as us. Now, Tony Blair couldn't have, it's like Tony Blair's wank dream, right? In fact, I don't know how they got connected with such a lawyer, how they got the money, and how he got into a court with it. It's almost like, Tony Blair could not have, in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if one of Tony Blair's think tanks arranged it to happen. It's Tony Blair, for his stratagem, for his strategy, for his long-term strategy master plan, that event, for that to happen, would be like him, he's like blowing his candles out on his birthday cake. He could not have dreamed. It's almost like, the Tories went to Andrew Bridgen, you can have anything in the world. Andrew, if you just show up, you can have anything in the world, absolutely anything. What is it you want to show up? It's almost like Tony Blair, you can have absolutely anything in the world, Tony. Anything, what do you want? Well, actually, I'd love it if a lot of illegal immigrants went to the, High Court and European Court and just said, oh, by the way, you got the same rights as people in England because the Human Rights Act's old enough, and then, Suella Braverman's like, oh, Maximus full. Well, we're going to have to get rid of it now. What a shame. Because then we won't have the same rights. But actually, Suella, we have got rights in England because Parliament is separate to the authorities, and when we use privileges, English people have got privileges. I don't know why Suella Braverman and the MPs are trying to make out that we can't enforce privileges, because they wouldn't even be able to have their own, and it doesn't affect the European Union having their privileges, right? And this is a thing. Suella Braverman is talking tosh. If Suella Braverman thinks that decision that was made in that court has given and Ben, unfortunately, I'm supporting Ben Habib at the moment, but he's severely misled if he thinks that those foreigners have got exact same rights as us, then why doesn't the e-petitions committee and the e-petitions team believe that? And why haven't they changed the website instead of, you can only start a petition if you're in the English territories or England, right? They're not even accepting half of the petitions from us. And we have got the right to use that website. They're rejecting all those. So if Suella Braverman and Ben Habib believe that, that case against, human rights for foreigners is anything, then why haven't the petitions team and committee, why haven't Jamie Stone and the leader of the House of Commons changed the website so you don't have to be, from American English territory, right? You don't have to be from, a specific English territory to use that e-petition site. Why can't someone in China use that e-petition site? Why can't all these refugees use that e-petition site? Well, they can't. They haven't changed it. So until they do, Suella Braverman, and Ben Habib can't be right about the fact that they've got the exact same rights as people in England, which they clearly don't, for political rights. Or else Jamie Stone would have opened up the website to everyone, and then we'd have a situation probably where, could you imagine if they did open that website up to foreigners and then they were publishing more petitions from illegal immigrants than they were from English citizens, which they're not publishing hardly any of them from English citizens because we're being blocked, and Parliament is going to be there to settle grievances as much as it is to get business through of parties. Supposedly, in the Bill of Rights it says that, yet the only clause in that Bill of Rights which Parliament obsess over and repeatedly obsess with in every committee report on privileges is that stupid freedom of speech article, as if that's the only one worth talking about. Yeah, it says that Parliaments have to be formed to address grievances, and they've basically shut us down for redressing grievances, and they're only there to put their own business through, and a lot of that business now is illegal against the right to life, at the moment, acts they're working on. We're not getting any court cases to challenge the legislation at all. Yet, I just can't believe they got the absolute cheek to do the Online Safety Act and then block all the adult sites off when they know very well that the Americans are assessing and profiling every citizen, and China as well, submit, consent, accept to it. And if we go to war, and if everyone did go to army, then they literally know all the likes and dislikes, strengths, weaknesses of every soldier, right? Which is a good example for it. So Ken McCallum, this is to do with the national security of England. What America are doing now is illegal at the moment, and they don't. At what point do they become a threat? Well, actually, I think they become a threat, right, when they're getting information on your country against Article 8 of the Human Rights Act. Surely, right? Hey, just a minute. America is acting illegally, unlawfully, getting information on every English person. We're not at war with them at the moment. They're allies, but is that information a threat if we did fall out with them, right? And did they obtain it lawfully? Yet, Julian Assange takes a few photos and gets a couple of videos, and the whole world is talking about him, and, the Americans are hunting him down for breakfast because he flashed a little bit of a video of some soldiers shooting someone, or shooting at people. What happens if that Julian Assange video would have been a data disk with the personal likes and dislikes of all of the army, right? All of the soldiers, right? And instead of them just shooting at people, it was all of the likes and dislikes and personal sexual preferences and, biometrics data of the American army people. Then Julian Assange would have been, probably hounded more by the American government, but that's what the American government are actually getting on us, all that information, right? And miraculously, Tony Blair happens to be doing this digital ID strategy plan, which Starmer's following him through with, and it needs certain mechanisms of implementation, and those articles now seem to be an obstruction to that, although they're completely trying to ignore them, yet they're calling some of them out and giving that an excuse to scrap the act, right? So, and then now, Trump has invited Tony Blair onto his peace panel after Tony Blair was being hunted down for war crimes. So, these people are absolute lunatic, fruitcake, psychopathic. It's like Lex Luthor. Tony Blair, right, must go to on trial, right? And I'm starting to think now that, 1996 with that stupid American Decency Act, they forced that on everyone on the world, right? That act, Google and YouTube used it against the world and actually obstructed and intervened in people's political campaigns and actions in other countries. That's effectively like what that Nigel Bromwich has done from that Exit Hate, because he went and edited all the Wikipedia pages and even teamed up with Facebook to obstruct certain political materials, right? Which is what Facebook have been doing the whole time, taking political materials down, but they're foreign. So Ken McCallum, there is very serious problems. Now, it is possible to listen back to this video and write these things down, especially where I've corrected myself, when I know that I said, instead of Human Rights Act, I said Online Safety Act. I did correct that, right? There's a model going on here between these non-department government agencies which have taken on most of the complaints but are not acting on them because they're bottlenecking them and they're implementing all these policies which are very similar to these big corporate policies like YouTube and Facebook, right? And therefore, we're not getting hardly any action in the courts for things that we need to get on, and these human rights article processes aren't getting raised in the courts on things we need to get them raised on, yet someone's miraculously managing to get them raised, and when they do get raised, it's foreign people who seem to be, invading this country, who are not only physically invading it, by coming into it, they're also attacking us with the courts and trying to make out they've got the same rights as us. And then Suella Braverman wants to scrap the whole act. Yet that's not even being currently followed by the government or legislating against it. Yet they're completely and totally two-faced. They're two-faced, spiteful, despicable people. Yet they're stood in Parliament holding sheets of paper, speaking very posh. I'm not having a go at Ben Ahib there. I'm talking about, these MPs, right? He's standing in Parliament, holding a very important piece of paper, speaking about, well, yes, apparently it's, really important and relevant, yet they're voting on taking away the right to human life and multiple acts, but yet saying that, we need to scrap this Human Rights Act. Yet they're not saying things like, hey, just a minute, hasn't this Human Rights Act been completely and totally, utterly violated by us, and we're allowing foreign countries to violate it, and it's a very serious, illegal action. Yet the only person who seems to be getting prosecuted is Julian Assange, not Mark Zuckerberg. And I forgot to mention, taking all this into consideration, if you understand what I've said, if you draw it down on paper and write a model out for it, Parliament, non-departmental government agencies, police, courts, and the process by which you challenge these human rights article violations, or the court does, and then who's been challenging them, mainly only foreigners, and they've been winning, right? And yet, we need those articles to be enforced, yet Suella Braverman's calling for it to be scrapped now, right? But yet it can't possibly affect our political rights here. Otherwise, every single illegal immigrant will be doing petitions to Parliament and, potentially rejecting all our petitions and only acting on foreigners' petitions, right? Which is absolute nonsense because they're not registered to vote in England. They're not registered to vote, right? This is one for Cyril. Look, right? What? Cyril Braverman, right? What absolute, pure, absolute tosh from these MPs, right? And Ben Habib needs to understand this, right? Ben Habib needs to understand, right? Foreign immigrants don't have a right to turn up in a polling station in England and vote for an MP, right? That wasn't proved in that case, right? It wasn't. It wasn't proved in that case, right? Or else it would be at the polling station voting, right? And I know Starmer wants to try and get them all to vote and vote for Labour, right? Currently, they can't turn up in a polling station and vote in England. So they're not engaging with the Bill of Rights on that level for elections. And as far as I see, Jamie Stone and the leader of the House of Lords is not letting them start petitions on e-petitions, right? Unless they're from a British Dominion, right? And they're rejecting all our own petitions when Parliament's going to be there for that purpose as much as putting business through, right? So, and the Human Rights Act clearly distinguishes between Parliament and public bodies, right? So, you know, elections are a parliamentary process to vote, right? And foreigners can't vote in England. So they haven't got all our rights. They don't have all our rights. And anyone who says that they do is lying to you and full of absolute tosh and bullshit, right? So the situation is that we actually are under we're under a special military operation, right? That's what Putin called it. Putin called it a special military operation. Well, if foreign countries are acting illegally, regardless of if they're friends or enemies, right? Foreign countries are using big platforms, multi-billion-dollar platforms, which are actually acting globally against the Human Rights Act and forcing us to give up our privacy without any choice or option, and the government are advertising that on its website, you know, advertising Facebook, YouTube, Blue Sky, etc., on their parliamentary contacts page, which, by the way, Parliament aren't supposed to promote or advertise private companies, right? Not do commercials for companies, right? And then one of the main characters, one of the main guys in all this, Mark Zuckerberg, who's running Facebook, he's been blocking political material, he's been taking down political material in a foreign country, right? He has bought himself an underground nuclear bunker retreat out of all the money he's made. And let's get this clear, he didn't have that money in the year 2000 because he was still scratching around as a nerd on a computer in a college in America and building a website, right? And in the space of, like, you know, a very short time, you know, 25 years, you know, you can grow a 25-year-old child in that time, you know, like, oh, I've just grown a human, right? He's grown himself a multi-billion-pound company. He's sitting next to Donald Trump having, like, feast dinners at the White House, right? Boasting about all the money. But Mark Zuckerberg has teamed up with that Exit Hate UK, blocked political content, right, on YouTube, which I reported. So we know that they're blocking political content, helping some political content and reducing others. That's an offence that Callum should act in, right, for sure. They're also profiling and gathering data on all the people illegally because we're being forced to do it, right? And then they're trying to put a war on us where if we went to war, that foreign countries have got the data on all our soldiers, all their preferences, likes, dislikes, etc., right? And Mark Zuckerberg, the person who should be being prosecuted for this, and Sergey Brin, are the people in the world who happen to have built themselves underground military bunker retreats in case there's a nuclear war. Mr. Ken McCallum, excuse me, sir, right? I noticed that there are a couple of big companies that have popped up not everyone makes that much money, and they seem to be completely and totally, utterly forcing us without any choice, and Parliament encouraging it by promotional activities, us giving up all our privacy and personal information to them. And that's illegal under the Human Rights Act at this time and while they've been doing it. And out of everyone in the whole fucking face of planet Earth, the people who own and are in charge of these companies happen to be the exact, precise people who have been building themselves an underground nuclear retreat bunker in case there's a nuclear war, right? Is Mark Zuckerberg, right, this is one for the Crown Prosecution Service now. So I've got my question now. I've got my question for Ken McCallum of MI5, right? Is the country, or let's narrow it down to person, most likely to be a threat to a country, the exact, precise and sole person who might have built themselves a nuclear war bunker retreat because they might think that there's going to be a war and that there's a threat of war, but they're the person who's been breaking the laws of other countries to get information on everyone? That's interesting. Of all the deductions and tests that the Crown Prosecution Service could possibly come up with, China's not a threat, there's no threat there. Question. Ken McCallum. Question. Mr. Parker of the Crown Prosecution Service. Question. Does Mark Zuckerberg believe there is a threat of a nuclear war? And if he didn't, why did he spend X billion or million on a fucking nuclear bunker if he didn't believe there was such a threat? Would you spend $1 million or $1 billion on a nuclear bunker retreat if you did not believe or have any inclination that there might be going to be a war, particularly a nuclear one, right? And who would provoke such a war? Hey, just a minute. That person's been forcing us into giving up all our personal details and information, having experiments done on us, personal tests, responses, right? Likes, dislikes, stress testing thresholds, all this type of data, like, showing me these adverts, how many adverts does it take till I fucking go ballistic and fucking headbutt the wall, right? That's what a military opponent would do. In fact, question, would Mr. Putin and his government benefit from having a disk drive which contained the entire digital profile data, health information, likes, dislikes, stress testing thresholds, and various other information of every single fucking person in England, all 60 million of them, on his personal fucking disk drive in case that we went to war with Russia, particularly if he was going to be using, drones with cameras on them against individuals, right? That's interesting. That would be something that, you'd be worth chasing Julian Assange over, stealing or giving over. But hey, we don't need to, because Mark Zuckerberg has got it on his fucking disk drive server. In fact, they're distributed all around the world in different countries, we don't even know which fucking country they're in, right? Because, I'd like to know what country they're in to see if he's breaking election law, right? Gets using devices in other countries. But the Online Safety Act seems to be completely, and I did say it correct that time, the Online Safety Act seems to be not caring what country you're in. You can be in America on American servers with an American website, but the English government are saying that there's a law in England, Online Safety Act, which is making them. But, if you're in America, how can you get prosecuted by someone in England when you've got an American website in America? So what if an English person visits it? It's in America, right? So why are they doing this cross-country law now? Why are they weaving in this Online Safety Act? But yet they never stopped Facebook from enforcing that Section 230, which was completely and utterly illegal against our laws. And that was something that Ken McCallum and MI5 should and must act in, like my YouTube channel, which has been taken down by Facebook. YouTube, but Facebook has taken down people's pages, like, Matt Hardy, Blade Runner, and Claire Dyer, and other people's who are doing political campaigns, right? That Section 230 is being used to take down certain political content illegally, because we don't have that law in England. So whenever that Section 230 is relied upon by a policy, which is not UK law, Ken McCallum and MI5 are meant to act, right? They're supposed to act, because that is actually within their remit, right? But also, we can say to MI5, there's a law, and it says that Article 8, right, of the Human Rights Act has been broken, because there are all these entities, and they're actually forcing us and coercing us to give up all our personal details and information, stress testing levels, personal profiling, medical, status, all this stuff. And a man who has built himself a nuclear bunker and believes there is a real threat of nuclear war is currently holding that information, right? He's holding it all. Now, Mr. Putin would probably like that information. Are we gonna, if Julian Assange wants to sneak into Mark Zuckerberg's bunker and, then pass it to Putin, that would be worth something to put in the news, wouldn't it? Right? Forget China. So, at the moment, this whole thing is absolutely despicable. And we need to prorogue Parliament and just stop. And they've already done that, and they've drawn that card. They drew that card out to make sure to try and stop us from doing it now. And that whole nonsense with Johnson, with the proroguing the Parliament with the Queen, and then the whole pandemic thing, all the construction things were carrying on, right? All the construction things carried on because they wanted to carry on with construction because they knew it was all tosh, right? Now, this is the thing. We need to prorogue Parliament and stop all this, right? Now, at the moment, they don't want to give up. Basically, they want to take over the world. They've got Tony Blair's plan. They've already got all this data. I mean, I don't think we could make them delete it now. They're going to hide it somewhere. I mean, they've got all the data on us. They've already done us, basically. They've raped us. They pulled us pants down. They raped us. They've got the data now, right? I'm holding the phone in my hand. They've got the data. I mean, we don't know which server it's on in the world. All the different countries have got different laws. Matt Zuckerberg's probably got a backup drive of it in his nuclear bunker. So it's done. It's done. We were raped. So all my stress testing levels are on file somewhere in this world. And if there's a war on, they can make use out of that. All of my likes and dislikes, everything, right? And I've been forced to do that by a foreign platform, Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin. They're not English. It's an American platform. It's an American country. I've been raped by them. I'm being subjected to stress testing experiments through Neil Mohan's ads. Guy Parker at the Advertising Standards Authority is not even on this planet. He wouldn't even know how to unfold a paperclip, right? Guy Parker wouldn't even know how to change a light bulb, right? He's not going to take any action in the courts against Mark Zuckerberg or, Google for the ads stressing people, because he's under a policy and an administrative law regime which is non-departmental government, and he's there to make sure complaints don't get acted on, right? Like Ofcom with 77,000 complaints against GB News, right? You know, and Farage, etc. He's there to make sure none of those complaints get acted on, just like the e-petitions committee is set up now to make sure none of our grievances get shared and published so people can find out all of this type of thing and sign it and support it. We're not allowed to share it, right? So that's what the Advertising Standards Authority are doing, and Ofcom have been doing, just like the e-petitions committee, that policy. And even some of the local councils and mayors now have been stopping people from speaking in council meetings, like that Karina from Colchester Council Watch, right? And they've been lying and using these fake policy administration clauses when, you know, under the Public Meetings Act 1960, the local council ones, it's completely privileged, right? And they can say what they want in relation to their claim, right? So the local councils have been obstructing and suppressing it as well. So I think our own government are against us, and they're against us through this inserted policy and administrative law, which is like a virus which has managed to get in from these think tanks, and it's against a lot of standing orders of local councils and standing orders of Parliament. And it's people like the Leader of the House of Commons and the Petitions Committee who sign these ridiculous policies that can't possibly be lawful, right? They're not lawful. They're against standing orders, right? So that is your own... That is contempt of Parliament and treason there. That is your own MPs acting against their own country, right? So, you know, look at the faces of these people. Who are they? Well, unfortunately, it's like, you know, you want to hit a man with glasses. It's like Jamie Stone, right? And the Leader of the House of Commons of England. The Leader of the Parliament of England, the House of Commons. So we've got agents. And this is why I think they called them non-department governmental agencies, and why administrative policy and law is agents. So it's all about agents, but, you know, you used to call them secret agents. You know, there's a secret agent working for Putin or a secret agent working for Mark Zuckerberg, right? Well, they're not secret anymore. They're actually fully infiltrated into our government now. So like Guy Parker, he's not acting on complaints to advertising standards about these platforms stress testing us. They've got mechanisms which really are harmful and causing distress and anxiety. He's not acting. You know. He's an agent. So Guy Parker is an agent. He's under a administrative regime policy. He's non-departmental government. He's been told what to do, so he is an agent, right? The Leader of the House of Commons is an agent. Unfortunately, Jamie Stone is an agent. The Mayor of Colchester Council acted on a policy. He claimed it was a policy. It cannot possibly be true, because therefore he would be acting against the privileges of the Public Meetings Act 1960 for local councils, right, which says that the meeting's privileged. So the Mayor of Colchester is an agent. So they've got all these agents, and I just think that all of these like non-departmental government agencies, they're all agents. So our government, this is what people are saying now, right? You've got people like Jimmy Dore, and you've got people like Russell Brand, and you've got people like, George Galloway and, Gareth Icke, or, I could reel out a list. You've got all these lists of people who are now coming out with this phrase, which is completely and totally wrong. And that phrase is that, it's only, how is a very small number of people taking over the world? How is it a very, very small number of people, only like Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or Sergey Brin? Why is it only very, very small? It's not a very small number at all. They've got a fully implanted army of agents, right? And the think tanks came up with the policy idea to implant it, and they've got all the staff complying with it and obeying it, right? I was speaking to MI5 complaints the other day. There was 2 women on there. They took my complaints down. They were brilliant, right? And actually something happened after that. The police said they're not going to investigate non-hate crime reports anymore, right? And I'm hoping something happens, to do with all of the Wikipedia editing that's been going on, affecting candidates in elections, right? But I rang up again last night to try and talk about this, because this is not easy to explain how MI5 have a responsibility in this, right? If you're going to complain to them, MI5 need to have a role, and they have to have a clause which they're responsible for in this, right? And that clause is definitely when it comes to my YouTube channel, right? My YouTube channel being taken down, that is an MI5 problem, because it's a foreign platform which interfered in UK democratic process, right? And I actually never reported it to MI5 before, because I didn't think to do that, because I'm trying to sort out with Parliament, right? And then, obviously, Facebook blocking when you search for Paul Golding because he's got a political party, right? That is an MI5 issue, and I did report it to them. But because it has to be a threat to the country, now, because the law is being broken by foreign businesses on a very large, very big foreign businesses, they're not small. We're talking about foreign businesses that have an application with every citizen. Like, we're talking about Facebook, we're talking about YouTube. This is not just a business, right? This is like an empire. They've got, it's like the power station, like the electricity company, the power station, right? They've got everyone's on the electricity panel, right? It's not just like someone shipping, prawn crackers over to England, right? These people have contracts with every single, all the phones and that, and all the websites and everything like that, right? When I mean to say everyone's on Facebook, right, or everyone's on Google or using Google or got a Google account type thing, that level of like a number of people, right? And they're forcing us with coercion. In fact, once you have accepted it, then you can't really get off it. You can't say I've changed your mind, right? So if you don't have a choice in it, then you're almost captured, right? If you say like, oh, I don't want these policies anymore, but then, all your, how can you get out of Google? How can you remove all your things from Google Drive, delete all your information, and so forth and so forth and so forth, right? That there's some element of entrapment in it and coercion, but there's a lot of illegal. It's all been done illegally, so none of it's legal, because even if you do accept that policy and agree to it, it's took your privacy away. So you haven't got any privacy. You have to have privacy in order for that clause to work, right? Now, I don't want to go into the ins and outs, right? There's all these opt-ins and opt-outs and so forth, right? But a lot of people don't know where the controls are for them. They don't know how to operate them. It's confusing. And a lot of stuff you can't opt in and out of, For example, when you're on the platforms and how you react to something on the platform, right? It's not like you're opted in or out for them to look at your data on your phone, because when you are viewing their videos and they're flashing ads at you and how you respond to them, right? They are going to assess that data whether you opt in or opt out or not, right? So that, they can do stress tests and scientific experiments on us and stuff like that and gather data, which is, for military purposes, that's actually extremely, extremely important. That's probably, more important. If Putin had all of the digital data, for stress test levels for each individual British citizen, and we all got prescribed to the army, that would be extremely useful to Putin if he was using drones like China, which were using sort of like facial recognition or targeting people's mobile phones, because like he could just like hack into them and find their identities and all things like that. So, but they've got the information, right? And we don't know where it's been stored or it's been shared with, and apparently they've been wanting to share some of this with private companies, and some of these private companies are making weapons, remember, right? It says that they can share it to third-party companies, some of this data, right? And then some of these third-party companies might be making, weapons and developing weapons because, they're doing that as well, and all these non-profits, So I don't like it. We've been coerced into the whole situation, and now they're wanting to scrap that Human Rights Act, which says that you've got these rights. It's almost like Suella Braverman is the ultimate traitor of all of planet Earth to me, because it wasn't even English people who challenged, those immigrants' rights or the foreign people's rights and the Human Rights Act. But Suella Braverman's meant to be a lawyer herself. Suella Braverman's an MP, but she's meant to be a KC. She was the Attorney General. And then you've got the government have been doing all these things like, they've been challenging or objecting to certain things, they've been appealing against certain things. Why isn't it the government themselves who have been, objecting to all our data? Why hasn't the government itself raised the issue for Article 8 of the Human Rights Act? Instead, Suella Braverman wants to scrap it, right? I don't see Suella Braverman, going to see Jamie Stern to say, well, you'll have to let all these immigrants, start petitions on our website now because of that case. Or I don't see her saying that, we'll have to let them turn up at the polling station and vote. Although Starmer's he's wanting them to, he's calling the elections off. He's hoping that they all get registered to vote as quickly as possible so then they can outvote us, right? That's what Starmer's hoping. But they can't quite vote at this time. So, they don't have all the rights that we have. So, it's quite a long video, this, and there's quite a lot in there. It can be imparted probably a lot more simpler than I've said it. It can be imparted a lot probably clearer than what I've said it. Maybe I should draw a little diagram for it. But just it's Mark Zuckerberg is absolutely flaming hot on the hotspot on the money on this, Zuckerberg has actually built himself a nuclear bunker because you wouldn't even entertain building one if you didn't believe there's a strong chance of being a serious threat, right? And he's the man who's gathering all this data and pushing to be allowed to have it. Yeah, he's in a foreign country and he's got many, many people using his service from the whole country. The BBC advertised, and Parliament have got it on the website. And Tony Blair wants to implement it into digital ID. Yet, to get that data, they had to break the Human Rights Act. Because, and through deception and misleading people and making things hard to find and see, right? So, Zuckerberg is, I don't know how the American government can, now it's, having, Zuckerberg at the side of, Donald Trump, the American president, who's meant to be this, friendly character now, who's, wanting to work with a peace panel or whatever. It literally is now starting to look like, it's this kind of a little like, the regime. Zuckerberg's definitely like one of these sort of, he's definitely like, American Eagle, American Valkyrie sort of, when you watch these military films of the Germans and they've got these certain people high up in different places or heads of department, Schindler's List and all this, right? And Schindler's List was about the Jews, right, wasn't it, right? Zuckerberg definitely is one of these. If you switch the accents, right? I mean, you couldn't have cast a more perfect role for Zuckerberg. He's got a nuclear bunker under the ground, He's supposed to be Jewish, He's like Schindler's List. It's like Zuckerberg's list. It's like Zuckerberg's got the full list of everyone's data. Like Schindler had a list of all the people, who were going to survive and not be killed. But Zuckerberg's built himself a nuclear bunker so he survives, right? And then there's going to be all these drones used, and if there's going to be any information, about people's psychologies, stress test levels, reactions, responses, likes, dislikes, the full Monty, right? That data, right, you got on all the people, It's like Mark's list, isn't it? It's like Mark's data. So instead of Schindler's List, it's like Schindler's data drive. But where is it, you know? Is it? We don't know where Schindler's data drive is. He's probably got one in Iceland, you know? If Mark Zuckerberg's built himself a nuclear bunker under the ground, he's been having, Paul Stanitz, going on, cruises to Iceland. Hey, win a trip to Iceland with Paul Stamets. Go on a nice cruise to Iceland. I'm willing to bet now that this data, they've got so much money, with trillions at their disposal, and I'm willing to bet. And this is actually, this has just come out of nowhere now, right? It was bet. I bet that already all of the information that they've gathered on us, all the data and statistics and everything, right, that is useful, particularly if everyone gets prescribed for war, already Mark Zuckerberg is not just using servers all over the world, and Sergey Brin is not just using servers all over the world. I bet they've built a storage thing in Iceland with all the data on it, and you're never ever going to get your privacy back, ever. Never ever going to get your privacy back. And our government has just had the cheek to block out adult sites so we can't see them, and they've claimed it's for the safety of children, right? They've claimed it's for child safety, yet they've advertised, promoted, used the BBC and our Own Parliament website to advertise, promote these platforms, which aren't even English, which are foreign, against the Human Rights Act, while it's in effect, to give up our privacy, which has now been stolen and put on a hard drive like freaking Assange's fucking disk, right? And it's done. It's done. You can never get that back now. I mean, you could, put Tony Blair in the electric chair. You could give him a lethal injection. You could prosecute him in America for war crimes, right? We'll never get that back now, ever. He's done it to us. He did it. He raped us. We're being raped, It's like, touch a child's leg, Jimmy Savile. It's done. It can never be undone. Blair's, he did it. He's done it to us, And what they've done in order to get it, and what they've got out for it themselves, knowing very well what they're dealing with, and they've even built themselves nuclear bunkers, means that, they effectively, that they're prepared, Mark Zuckerberg clearly to defend himself. He's learned judo, right? And to defend all his money and all the data that he's stolen from us illegally against the Human Rights Act, is prepared to, the whole planet to be wiped out, because, he knows that, he's not going to give it over. He's prepared for there to be a nuclear war. In fact, he's expecting there to be a nuclear war over it. Mark Zuckerberg is expecting a nuclear war, right? And him and Sergey Brin are prepared. They're prepared for it. It's not like they haven't. If they hadn't, then they hadn't, right? But they have, right? You don't prepare for something if, you don't actually truly believe in it, So, and if they've got our data or they haven't, and if they got it illegally or they didn't, well, they did get it illegally because it says that we have a right to privacy. Well, I haven't got a right to privacy because I don't have any. I haven't got any privacy. He's already stole it, right? And it doesn't matter whether I submit consent and accept, because the Human Rights Act says that I've got a right to that privacy, but he's taken that right away. But I didn't actually, I didn't want it to be taken away. So, Zuckerberg is like, he's one of these Third Reich sort of American Eagle, Golden Eagle style caricatures, Mark's list is already, probably on some hard drive server. It's all around the world, You can't take it out because they've got servers in every country, agents in every country. They've probably got a massive backup in Iceland, in Antarctica. I wouldn't be surprised if Antarctica didn't have some massive backup drive for it altogether, so they're not have to be separated, right? It's done. It's done now. So now we're just sat here. The government won't prorogue itself because it's already played that card. It won't lock down. It won't stop legislating, right? And now we've got MPs stood up there talking, not Andrew Bridgen, and they're just talking. They're just talking nonsense. Like, on with a plan. Nothing to see here. None of this Andrew Bridgen nonsense, business as usual. Let's scrap the right to life. Let's get rid of it. We don't want anyone to have a right to life, kill life in the womb, kill life of, they're scrapping the right to life. They're scrapping the right to free speech. They're actually, these Human Rights Act things are an obstruction to world domination. So, this is the thing. Every single day in Parliament, and then they're blocking all these petitions, over 2/3 or even 3/4 of them. Yet Parliament is there for redress of grievances as much as business, according to the Bill of Rights. But all they're wanting to do is stand there and get their business through, where, it's the eagle has landed. I mean, that's the name of the film. The eagle has landed. Zuckerberg has landed. The golden eagle, the American eagle, has landed in England and was welcomed here. It's on the leader of the House of Commons Hawking wrist thing. It's like the leader of the House of Commons. It's like getting a secret message coming through from the pigeon. He's landed on his wrist. Leader of the House of Commons. Like Mark Zuckerberg's eagle, golden eagle, on his outstretched arm. Yeah, they're advertising all of Facebook, YouTube, all these platforms on the website, right? Yeah, why isn't YouTube and Facebook being made to not force us to do all these things, right? This is the thing. Where are all the court cases calling it out? They're not. We're fucked. We're fucked because think tanks now have implemented non-department governmental agencies. The Labour and Tory party have implemented think tank policy, like, for example, in the e-petitions team. They're a Third Reich team. The e-petitions team, they're they're eagle agents, right? They're blocking British citizens from accessing a democratic process, right? Guy Parker, Ofcom, Lord Hallam was in charge of YouTube. We've been infiltrated by agents. It's not one or two people, right? This bullshit about, it's like, why was a very small very small number of people doing this? They're not. They got agencies, they got agents. We've been taken over by agents, right? And they're already here. They're already in the Advertising Standards Authority. They're already in Ofcom. They're already in the e-petitions team. They're acting in Parliament. They've got high positions in Parliament. Leader of the House of Commons, leader of the e-petitions committee, right? Hawkers. Mark Zuckerberg's all there with the gadgets and everything. And they're actually now forcing all our businesses onto this digital identity, which, there's 3 million people signing a petition to stop it. So, and what other petitions have got evidence to prove that they're doing this, that it's happening, or other things that they shouldn't have been doing? They're blocking them. They won't let us share them. We can't raise the alarm. We can't raise the awareness. We can't get the signatures. So, we're fucked. We've been taken over. And some of them are just like wokies. Unfortunately, like, Ed Davey, he's like Joy Lamorgan, he's while this is happening, they're, destroying male and female, right? Like, we will scrap these sexes, we're going to scrap the Human Rights Act, and we're going to scrap the sexes, male and female, because, they just want to be able to grow babies and then flick the gender depending on whatever they feel like, whatever day of the week, If you've got a right to gender, and if there's a right to, we're talking about a right to the gender that God gave you and the right to protect genders that exist, not the right to conjure up genders, right? This is the thing. It's just ridiculous. So, that human rights clause, the right to privacy, is just absolutely... And the thing is, I don't think they've got the Convention of Human Rights in America, right? So they never had an incentive to uphold it. Instead, they attacked us with their Section 230, right? So all these things like, the Human Rights Act ended up being used to infiltrate England because they had that court case to say that all the foreigners have got the same rights as us, right? So when someone did get a lawyer, they used it to attack, and then it gives an excuse to scrap it all, which is what Suella Braverman's calling for, which it was the intention from the start to scrap it anyway. So I really don't know what's going to happen, because at the moment there are a lot of people talking about these things, but it's difficult. They're not letting us use the official channels to criticise them or disagree with them on it. They're blocking us. And, you know, a lot of council meetings are trying to exclude people from there. So, you know, what could we do? Well, there needs to be a lot of court cases which are calling out incompatibilities with the Human Rights Act, right? Not what Suella Braverman and the Tories are saying to scrap it, quite the opposite, right? We need to go and have court cases and actually say, right, the government, you know, they let this act, that, all the new acts they've put through are illegal against those clauses. All the main big platforms are illegal, what they're doing and how they've done it, right? And the political material and content. But in order to do that, it now implicates the whole government, because they've actually encouraged it and even promoted it and advertised it, because it's kind of part of their plan. But they've implemented this plan unlawfully, right? They're doing it illegally. But then there's supposedly hiding behind privilege. But these offences are treasonous, right? They're very, you know, treason and felony. The King may, out of Parliament, question treason or felony in the House, right? According to John Pym, right? So we need prosecutions against some of these people, which can be done in the Supreme Court, you know. But, you know, why are these pro bono people not coming forward? Instead, you know, we've got Big Brother Watch is raising money, trying to, you know, stop digital, against digital ID and against the, the facial recognition. But all that is only happening because, you know, facial recognition on security cameras everywhere. But what about your mobile phones? What Big Brother Watch, I think, would benefit from is saying, look, you know, all of our mobile phones, which have got all this data, has taken our privacy away against the article of the Human Rights Act. And they definitely needed to break the law in order for them to fully implement all this digital ID thing that they're bringing in. And they've encouraged the platforms to do it. In fact, work with them, like, you know, Clegg working at Facebook, right? And if they could go in and prove that incompatibility with the Article 8, then that would be really cool. But you need a case to crop up with it in, right? Or do what those foreigners did. You know, those foreigners managed to do it. They're actually using the Human Rights Act against us to invade us, right? But when, you know, they haven't managed to get themselves the right to vote without having an English passport or being born in England yet. So they haven't really actually completely and totally said that they got the same rights as us, because, you know, it would be ridiculous to say that they had the right to vote. But Starmer's acting like that. Starmer's like, you know, come in, quick, you know, I need to call off these council elections so I can, you know, get rid of these oligarchies of people who are opposed to digital ID, so I can, you know, we can outvote them, right? Which is that if he intended to do that, surely that's treasonous, right? Because he's acting against his country. Surely, if Starmer is welcoming in more and more foreign people so he can disrupt the oligarchies which are opposed to digital ID, then you know, the King can do that in the House of Lords, but I don't think they can lawfully do it in England because it's actually attacking the country. When the King disrupts that oligarchies in the House of Lords, he's putting people in the House of Lords who've got the right to be in the House of Lords, right? Making more English peers from English people, right? But what Starmer's doing is disrupting oligarchies by, you know, welcoming people in, or, you know, his colleagues and associates, Putin and the rest of them are herding people into the country, right? And if that disrupts the voting and elections, then he's actually encouraging a foreign infiltration of England, right? And yeah, we've already had a digital infiltration of England. You know, there's definitely something in this, and for sure, my YouTube channel is one of the key pieces of evidence, because that was a foreign law which does not apply in England, which intervened in a democratic process, and that is actually where Ken McCallum is meant to act, right? Because that actually was a violation, right? And taking into account who did it, Google, right? And then you can say, well, it was Google who did it, Google YouTube, and that was a violation, a proper violation of a democratic process by an American entity, business, who didn't have a legal right to do it, right? And what else are they doing? Well, they've actually also violated loads of our rights to privacy at the same time as well. And that means that if they're trying to obstruct my political activity and actions, but they're also getting information on me against my privacy and data, right? And, these people are building themselves underground war bunkers, right? Now, if I wanted to act against Mark Zuckerberg or Sergey Brin, right, in the law courts, I'm acting against them, right? But then if they do not comply with the courts, then surely we've got they're not my friends. They aren't my friends. They're acting against us. And these people have built an underground bunkers, right? I mean, what's Mark Zuckerberg going to do? If I get him into the European court, is he going to hide in his underground bunker? If I get him into some court in America, is he going to hide in his underground bunker? He's in another country. All of this stuff that Tony Blair's been planning and implementing, he's implementing it to do with foreign allies. They're helping him. They're all part of. They're all doing different parts of it, and for that reason, because they've done it through American platforms and they've suppressed all the smaller platforms which didn't have those policies and which didn't spam us with adverts. But they also coerced everyone into signing up to adverts as well. Everyone who had a private website, Google bought them. They sold out. They're like all of these people who make things for a little free website, which was really cool, right? And people made it for fun, for a hobby. After all these businesses put the prices up so no one can afford the cost of living, all of these cool little free websites all had signed up to Google and sold their souls to the devil, and then they allowed all the websites to be non-user friendly and filled up with all this spam. And then they become agents then. That's how you become an agent also of like the Google empire, by selling out to Sergey Brin on your website, having his fucking adverts on there, right? Taking his money because, him and all these big empires have put the prices up so no one can afford something. Then you can't afford to do kind things for free for people, right? And then you have to have the ads on your website, and then you have to be part of the obstruction, part of the slowing down, part of the harassment, part of this whole thing, but they're paying you off for it, so you're becoming agents, and that's also how the think tanks have been working in the government. So it's specific. I wouldn't have done it to the people in England, right? And I'll tell you, this is worth mentioning at the end of this, right? Back in 2000, around the time that Mark Zuckerberg was a super geek on his computer, building his geekoid Facebook thing and about to explode into the most powerful man in fucking planet Earth, right? I was sat there, right? And I was interested in, psychedelics and, ayahuasca and all types of different things like that, right? But one has dreams and fantasies, right? Now, I was sat in my room, right? And I was thinking, wow, wouldn't it be great if you could, get some money coming in and start some projects? And, if I was interested in all different kinds of things, right? I was interested in chemistry. I was interested in chemicals. I was interested in, like, the effects of different psychedelics and drugs. I had an interest in them, right? And I had an interest in all different types of things. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if you could, have your own little lab set up, to experiment with them? Or wouldn't it be cool if you could, have, a little company to do this or that, right? But I had a conscience and I had morals. And then in my head, I'm like, right, I could do this, but is it the right thing to do, you know? Wouldn't it be cool if you could have all these computers and do all these things, but then, you know, this is people's private personal information, right? You know, do I have a right to do that? I've never been a nosy person. Now, I know that governments and military need to know threats, and they need to know what's going on in other countries. And I know that they've always listened in on phone lines to people, and, you know, they've always had, you know, Prince Philip, whatever, you know, fucking listening in on the wiretap or whatever, you know. They like to listen to people's secrets or whatever, right? But I myself, if no one else is causing me any bother, right, I'm just not a nosy person. I just don't nose in. I ask people questions, right, but not, you know, in the way where, you know, I invade their privacy. Now, I know, and I knew at the time, I had this thought back in the year 2000. I'm like, you know, there'll be some people who wouldn't have thought, hey, you know, maybe I shouldn't do that because it's not the right thing to do, right? And I knew there were some people who would just do it anyway. And I'm like, you know, there's some, you know, because you've got to be inclined that way in order to want to take people's money off them anyway, to be a successful business person, even if it's an honest business, like, you know, providing healthy, fresh vegetables to someone, and you get very, very successful and you're selling more and more and more of them, right? But, you know, some of these farmers, they're not, apparently they're providing like tons of produce and only getting paid like £4 for it, right? That is getting ripped off. Now, you've got to be completely, totally heartless to do that, right? I would have loved to have, you know, had loads of different little enterprises and projects and businesses going and experiment things and find out stuff in life generally, you know, be like an inventor as well and, you know, test out. I built little models, you know. I even built a model of like a power station, just loads of things like that, right? But there are people who have ideas for projects and want to find stuff out and discover things, right? And there are people who want to do that who've got a conscience, right? And then there are people who don't. And there are people who take everyone's money from them, they nose into all their business, they find out all their stuff, and then when they know that they're completely, totally corrupt and criminal, they build themselves fucking nuclear bunkers under the fucking ground because they can afford it and no one else fucking can. And they're breaking very serious laws of countries like the Human Rights Act, right? And taking down people's political material, but not taking it seriously, like, oh, this is a joke, right? You know, it's fun. Oh, what a shame, I'll sort it out later, right? This is the thing. Oh, you know, why don't you just fucking, you know, you send a Hiroshima bomb or something, and it's all right, sorry about that. It's like Tony Blair, it's someone else's problem. You know, this is the thing. These people don't have a conscience. Tony Blair clearly stated, right, being filmed live, you know, oh, fucking someone else's problem. Someone else's fucking problem, right? Our privacy, Article 8 of that Human Rights Act, is someone else's fucking problem to Tony Blair, which is our problem, the problem of every citizen in England, right? Oh, it's someone else's fucking problem. Yeah, our problem, the whole country's problem, because you illegally fucking nicked all our fucking data, right? This is the thing. It's someone else's fucking problem. And that's my evidence, right? Blair is a guy who's like, fuck him, it's someone else's problem, right? But not just with, and that's the problem, like, with all these, you know, multi-billionaires and multi-millionaires, because that's what Jeremy Corbyn is kicking off about, you know, like, Jeremy Corbyn's like, you know, that, you know, people shouldn't be starving or hungry, right, you know? But, you know, how about, you know, the people who are only giving, you know, £4 for a ton of, you know, vegetables when they're actually more healthy than McDonald's and people should be eating them more than McDonald's? This is the thing. And then there's all our health that was attacked, and they knew that all those things were affecting our health, and they'd even like done Taco Bell, which was like even worse, really adversely affecting people's health, but they'd installed these things and installed these drive-thrus and installed, it's all installation. A lot of this infrastructure has already been installed, and now they installed and set up the non-department government agencies, you know, who aren't going to do sweet FA about adverts that are annoying you. They're not going to shut down the whole of Facebook and YouTube, right? Because, Google have implemented it into every website. Surely, right, if you aren't annoyed with having to be spammed and bombarded and also wound up by the content, the subjective content, which is spying on you and reflecting shit back on nearly every website you go on now, because they all sold out to Sergey Brin and Google Ads, gave their soul to the devil, right? That is despicable. Just scandalous, If the Advertising Standards Authority, when you get all the complaints from the Advertising Standards Authority, everyone, if you can't identify, hey, like most of these ads are annoying people and upsetting them, but they're all on websites, and hey, just a minute, aren't they all on websites that, the website owner sold out to Google on as well? Hey, that's a lot of complaints. What happens when I put all these complaints together? What's the general opinion of them all? They all don't like the adverts. Hey, isn't the totality of advertising standards entire body of evidence now suggest that people don't like adverts? Well, we've only got 1 million complaints. It's like Ofcom, we've got 77,000 complaints, about GB News. Hey, we're the Advertising Standards Authority. Guess what? We've got millions of complaints. The adverts are harassing people, right? But what does that mean? It means that people don't like adverts. They're harassed by them. So we're not going to the court with every single case and file, put it on the table to the court and say, look, people in England don't like adverts. They find them fucking annoying and harassment. There, look. There is the evidence of harassment. Everyone's harassed by them, right? Now, if that can't get Google Ads banned, what can? Right? Because every single fucking website's got them. It's not user-friendly. And I just don't know what the fuck Mohan is doing with the YouTube menus. He's like making, it's like menus within menus within menus within menus. Do you know what Neil Mohan's fucking doing now? He's a sandwich short of a picnic, right? He's an absolute lunatic. He's a loony. He's not sane. He's trying to make, right, a YouTube video, one video, just press play, right? Press play, put a comment underneath. That's all you need, right? He's trying to make it like one video. This is not the whole platform, right? This is not even the whole platform. He's trying to make it so watching one videos is like Bill Gates' Windows platform. Oh, this is the whole computer, Windows, right? Pop the menu up, right? Programs, files, what fucking operating system, running thing. Neil Mohan, he's attempting to make a menu or a screen for one video, like into Bill Gates' Windows entire system for one fucking video. How many fucking buttons and options and pop-ups and ads covering up and, click on the thumbs up and you get 20 different fucking thumbs up you can have, and then everything you press on now is almost like a fucking Windows menu or some kind of All you want to do is press play and watch a video, and you can't even do that because of the adverts. This man, right, his brain, it's not from a normal person who lives in a normal country, right? I've showed the image. It's like the Indian Shiva pictures, when you got like 20 Shivas or 20 arms, or Ganesh with like 6 legs, 5 arms. It's not normal. It's like Joy Lamorne with his, gendering, he's like, he's Ganesh, is this a man or a woman? Is it male or female? Well, it's got both male and female parts. It's got a right to do that, right? This is the thing. It's a perversion of reality. And it's not even like, you know, this is progress. I don't think it is progress at all. It's not progress. It isn't better. He thinks it's better. What are the advantages of turning one YouTube video page into Microsoft Windows, right? Because why would you just want to watch it? Well, why are you there? Why would you open one video? You open a video, right, to watch a fucking video, right? Hopefully not interrupted, and hopefully it loads fast and buffers, right? And yes, thank you very much if it was a video that I was interested in, because, you know, it's got these algorithms and so forth, whatever. But, you know, there's algorithms for things that you have already been watching, but I'm not even too sure if these, you know, because, you know, what's the point of having a search box? What's the point in performing a manual search, right? You know, if you put a manual search in, you want to search for something. They don't need to actually, you know, spy on your life and surveillance you and run science experiments on you just for you to go. It's like going to a library, right? If you go to a library and they've got a very good search and filing system where it's very easy to search through the books or possibly even the text of the books, right? If I went into a library, right, that library doesn't need to know anything about me. That library doesn't need to know anything about me. It doesn't need to have any information on me, any spyware, any Trojans. I don't have to consent to me accept to anything, right? I can walk into that library as a private person. It's full of books and information, right? Now, if all those books and information were scanned into a computer so I could search it and search for words and terms in the books, and maybe if there was a bit of AI implemented, right, to help search through it at your fingertips, and then you could go to the shelf where the book is after looking for it on the computer and, oh, this is a great book and thanks for helping me find it, right? Notice that you don't actually need to know anything about the individual who's just walked in, right? You don't need to be popping adverts up in front of them. Hey, look at this book, look at that book. We really think you'd like that book. That's knowing everything about you. You want to go into a library as a completely, totally private individual person, right? And okay, we've got everything here. And then you just say, right, I'm looking for this, right? And then you find it like that because they've got an advanced search option. It doesn't need to know fucking anything about your habits, your behaviour or anything. That's beyond the interests and scope of the library, right? It's beyond the scope of the library, it's beyond the interests of the library, and it's invading your private life, and that's what the article of the Human Rights Act is meant to do, but it's not doing, right? And instead, we've got Mark Zuckerberg. If Mark Zuckerberg owned a library, right, with all the information there, you know, would, you know, if there was a war on, you know, okay, maybe the opposite army might want to destroy all the information, then you protect the information. But, you know, is Mark Zuckerberg protecting, you know, is Facebook, or is he protecting himself when he's got, I am Facebook, right? You know, when he's got a private bunker, is he built that, is it private, you know, is he going to have all his staff going there as well? But apparently he said by the time it's finished, he's not going to have any staff, right? So it's not like he's built it for him and his staff, because he's going to lay them all off, you know, like Elon Musk did, you know. And if there's a, you know, all those people who work for Mark Zuckerberg for years and years and years and years, right? You know, like Elon Musk turns up at Twitter and sacks everyone, right? You know, fuck them. So it's like Tony Blair, you know, it's someone else's problem, right? You know, I worked for Mark Zuckerberg for 20 years at Facebook, and now it's all fully AI automated. He doesn't have anyone work there. There's only him and his wife and his kids. So there's a war, and all right, well, I'll just go to my personal private bunker under the ground. What about everyone else? I've just got the room for one. Oh, I'll ring Tony up. Hey, Tony, do you want to come into my nuclear bunker? Right? What about everyone else on the planet? Oh, it's someone else's problem, right? This is the thing, right? So, this is it. You know, by the time Zuckerberg's finished, you know, he's not even saving his staff. You know, and who were they? They were the agents, you know. I think that is the model for the Matrix, right? Because, you know, on the Matrix, those agents aren't even real people. They're all digital, like the digital agents, right? So, I mean, even Facebook doesn't actually want to have any humans working there anymore. It just wants to have, like, these digital Matrix agents, like, you know, doing all the stuff. So, you know, if there's a war on, he wouldn't even be inviting his own staff down in there. So, to these people who work at Advertising Standards and, you know, or this e-petitions team or whatever, I don't know why they're working against their country. Why are they obstructing the people? Why are this e-petitions team lying? Why are they acting against standing orders? Why are they rejecting everything? Oh, I was told to. See the policy, right? You know, they can't think for themselves. They don't question things. They don't ask questions. You've got these leaders now who have been working with these political parties and think tanks and inserting these, you know, policies that aren't even the law, right? Not even the standing orders, and obstructing the democratic function. So, you know, what I say to these agencies, you know, you're an agent for as long as you're an agent, and then you're an ex-Twitter staff, you know, because you've been sacked. So they're just betraying the country. They're betraying the country and selling out on the country, because no one needs to know all this information about us, right? In fact, it should be illegal, but it's too late now. It's not like now we're blowing out all the porn or whatever, or blowing out all the adult stuff, the Online Safety Act. It's like, it's gone, you know. They've got our personal private data, and it's on some fucking hard drive somewhere, you know, under Antarctica or in Mark Zuckerberg's backup fucking drive thing. It's done, you know. We were raped, and, you know, now the rest of life on this planet is going to be, you know, you were done. It's like being touched up by Jimmy Savile, you know. We've all been touched up by, you know, Google and Mark Zuckerberg, you know, and then, you know, they actually think there's a high, you know, there's enough possibility of a war on that they actually built the fucking bunker, right? So, you know, what's going to be left, you know, after we're all dead, after they've nuked us all, then they're even going to have all our private data and information, you know. It's like all your private personal business and all these people on the planet Earth who existed, right? You know, what is the dignity in that, right? The dignity that they nipped all our stuff, right? They fucking thieved it. They thieved our information, right? They thieved it and tricked us, right? And then they will nuke us all, and then they've got it. They've got all our stuff, all our information, nicked it, and then they go and create new genetic humans, right? Or all under obedience, and they design them. You know, they can choose how many. Oh, we'll have 6 males, 2 females. There's no right to a gender, right? You have the gender that the commander tells you that you're fucking having, right? You know, there's none of those human rights act left at all. None of them, right? And, you know, then you've just got a genetically engineered, you know, perfect human race. That's apparently what the Nazis wanted to do, you know? So, you know, fuck Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg is Valkyrie material. You know, he's Gold Eagle, you know, and he's got the nuclear bunker to prove it. I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have done it to people. And the fact that the BBC sold it, the BBC pushed it, Parliament are advertising it on their website, right? And the fact that, you know, he thinks he's judo master, he's that worried, you know, that he's got to be a black belt in judo master, right, in order to, you know, go out, you know, feel safe in public. You know, you can't be doing things right. You know, you know, these businesses are too big. These people have got too much money. If Mark didn't have too much money and didn't have too much of a big business, you know, then he wouldn't need to be black belt and judo master, and he wouldn't need to have a nuclear fucking bunker. The only reason that he needs to have those things is because he's a threat to other people. You know, it's not the people who are the threat. He is the threat, right? And MI5 aren't doing nothing about it. You know, they're doing nothing. But yet, you know, so who exactly is on our side? You know, because this is the problem with the MPs now. The people of England are meant to vote on what they want and what they don't want, and the MPs are meant to represent that in Parliament, right? But they're not. So we've got MPs now who are doing this Tony Blair thing, right? Which is global world domination, mechanisms of implementation, right? And as long as every day that the MPs go in there and just say, oh, yeah, it's business as usual, let's get our business put through, they're betraying the people of the country, which is basically what Andrew Bridgen was saying. So the majority of these people are traitors. They're all traitors to England. They're traitors to the law. They're having to break the law to do this. And that's the main point. In order to do what they've been planning, they haven't been able to do it legally. And, it's like they've set up Facebook and YouTube in order to do it from overseas, right? So, it's Section 230. But so why didn't you act about it? Why haven't you acted? Why hasn't the Attorney General acted, right? It's like, they're allowing us to be raped and invaded. That's the worst part of it. And Tony Blair is the mastermind behind it all. But they've got it's been done from other countries. Each country's doing a different part of it, and Putin. And I know that because they've allowed Facebook and YouTube to do this and encouraged it, and it's definitely illegal, then that suggests to me that the physical side of it, the military moving people around side of it, Putin and NATO bullshit and all this, swarming people over here, managing to direct them all to swarm over, that is just another player in the game, which is why I think the Putin bullshit is a load of bollocks, right? Because he's another part of it, right? It's like there's different operations going on, and the whole lockdown was part of it. And then even the prorogation of Parliament, which turned out to have been done illegally because they don't want to do it. They pulled that card out earlier because they didn't want us to do it now, which is when we desperately need it now, right? We need to stop because they're actually legislating against the right to life and on this. We haven't had a referendum on this, If this Parliament was going to do absolutely anything now, which was in the interests of anyone who elected those people to be there, they would have a referendum on digital ID and the mechanisms of implementation, and even have, referendum questions like, do you think that Article 8 of the Human Rights Act was violated by YouTube and Facebook by forcing you to give your information over? Do you feel that you were coerced into doing it? Do you think that your privacy has been invaded by this? Questions like that should be on the referendum, right? But this is what they don't want. This is what I'm trying to petition about on the website. They won't let me share it, publish, or raise information about it, which I know that they're illegally blocking us criminally because the standing orders of Parliament say that, we can do that. So they're traitors to the people at the moment. Some of these MPs, they've got allegiance. Any MP, all MPs who are voting for this Labour things now, when Starmer's saying, you never stand for the party again, you never stand for the party again. Well, I say it's the fucking Golden Eagle Party. It's the Valkyrie Party. I'd never want to stand for that party, right? If you stand for Labour, you're standing for a military operation, a special military operation, right? That's what it is. Zuckerberg's part of the special military operation. That's why he's got a special military retreat bunker. Sergey Brin is part of the special military operation. If you have got a special military bunker, you're part of a special military operation, right? And if you say or not, you're a lying bastard, right? You're a fucking lying fuck, right? You're a little lying fuck, right? Putin is part of the special military operation. America's part of it. And our MPs are voting in Parliament in favour of a special military operation, which people in England are uprising against, are protesting against, they're trying to petition against, they're in revolt against, and it seems there's going to be a civil war against this special military operation. And even, Charles is quoted to say, that it's military style operation beyond leaders, right? with trillions at his disposal. Now, if that ain't saying, if Charles hadn't just said in Glasgow that if he hadn't just described the definition of a special military operation, that is a military style operation, is that a special one, right? That's beyond leaders, right? With children at his disposal, and they have to be on a warlike footing. If Charles hadn't just described the definition of what a special military operation was, then I don't know what description is, right? Other than the fact that Mark Zuckerberg is taking part of it, and so is everyone else who's built them a nuclear retreat bunker, right? So Labour are voting. They're a special military operation party, right? And they're voting things through for the special military operation, right? They're not enacting the laws of England or turning up to do business of grievances, which is what it says in the Bill of Rights. They're meant to turn up to do the grievances of the country. They're blocking them. And they're getting their business through, and their business is special military operation, right? Which is digital ID, takeover, getting rid of privacy, getting rid of all the right of assembly, freedom of speech, and the rest of it. So if you know, I wouldn't actually turn up, you know, if I were these MPs now, because they're all traitors. They're part of a Golden Eagle party which is performing a special military operation, and they're voting special military operation things through for Starmer. And if they don't, then there will be consequences. So it's a special military operation. Starmer is leading it. You know, he's on a warlike footing. Beyond leaders. So we got Zuckerberg. He's beyond leaders, right? He's a major player in it. Sergey Brin, right? He's a major player in it. You know, Jeff Bezos. Bezos is part of the special military operation as well, because he's taken charge of. He's got all of the people buying their goods and things through his company, and all under one and same policy. So, you know, we're being taken over by a special military operation, and MPs are voting for it and on behalf of it. They're not representing the electors. So it's like it's a special military operation party, you know, leader of the House of Lords. And Jamie Stone have signed a policy which goes against standing orders, which is part of the special military operation. Block petitions to Parliament, make sure people can't get them shared, make sure people can't share criticisms of the government and what they're doing, legal criticisms, even disagreeing with what is being done. Don't let them share that, right? Only very non-threatening ones, like, you know, Michael Westwood and this digital ID petition, which has got like one word or sentence. Don't let them include any, you know, important evidence in there, right? You know? And then once they once the maximum number of people who are signing these petitions is peaking around 3 million, and they can just ignore those, what can stop them? Nothing can stop them, right? And then they wanted to call off the elections. If they called off the elections, they should actually have to, make all councillors stand down. So there aren't any councillors. They should recall. If they're gonna call off the elections, they should have to be made to recall all of the councillors, so they can't have any. So, Mayor of Colchester, he's part of the special military operation because he's preventing people from turning up to give evidence in local council meetings, right? On policy clauses which go against the law of England. So, it's Putin was right. In my opinion, we are under but it's not a Russian special military operation, that's the thing. It is a global special military operation. And Mark Zuckerberg, and who's part of it? Well, I would say that if the person has got a very big company which does business with large numbers of the population, like Facebook, like every other person is on there, and that person has got a war bunker, and they've been involved or active with taking or finding out personal information about you against your right to privacy, then they're likely involved in a special military operation, right? Unless they're MI5, who we need to know what's going on. So the definition of people who are involved in the special military operation is like, you got to have a nuclear bunker, you got to be taking large amounts of people's personal private data, doing experiments on them, tests on them, and doing it unlawfully, illegally, because nothing that this operation has done yet has been lawful or legal. It's all illegal and criminal. So, how long Starmer can continue his special military operation, I don't know, because the people are starting to get more and more annoyed now. But because, everyone is not organised, it's difficult to get things done. Because remember, all of these other people are under orders. They're under these administrative directions now, administrative policies and orders, which have been inserted from the think tanks to follow the policies of the big organisations, groups and companies, right? In order to actually take command and control of the staff of these non-departmental government agencies, so they can't act or won't act like Guy Parker. He's not acting, right? So Guy Parker is, I don't think he's got a military bunker retreat, but he's sitting on the evidence. So Parker has, instead of all the complaints going to the police or the CPS, Parker's hoarding them all. He's got all of the complaints and evidence, but like the e-petitions committee, it's all been contained, right? There's a lot of complaints Parliament have got on petition, but they're all being hidden, right? People can't read them or see them, right? So Parker has got the evidence, basically sitting on the evidence that, these adverts are harassing people and upsetting them, but not just this advert or that advert or the other. It's like, the Google Ads is harassing a very large number of people that they don't like it. It's causing them distress, right? So Parker is now an agent who is preventing anything being done about it. So the longer and longer he refuses to act on the evidence that he's holding on mass widespread distress, anxiety, and non-user-friendly behaviour of the systems, the concept of it. And, you can block these ads, but they don't block, and then when the people just have to republish them again and it's unblocked, right? They republish it. And you're always going to get that first slap in the face. It's the first exposure, the first slap in the face, right? There's a damage. And they're not politically exempt. They haven't got any special exemptions in law. The things that are supposed to have exemptions aren't being given exemptions by these big platforms, right? Which is why my channel's been taken down. Yet all of the corporate and business things have. And this is what they've been doing on the streets, though. They've been taking over the public streets. All these companies and businesses, right, they're taking over the public domain, right? I mean, they're just throwing money at councils and governments, and they've got everything that they wanted. They've got JC Decos right down the middle of the pavements, all down it, causing obstructions. They've got these big light-up billboards with giant cats on them, Starship Enterprises, all these big distracting things over the motorways. They're allowed them. They've done it with money. They've paid them off, the councils, when all that's dangerous and distracting, and they've said, no, it's perfectly fine. But we're the ones who got prosecuted for looking at our phones. And then when people like Roger Hallam, right, go out and say, we're going to, put some banners up over the motorway, right, and then they get prosecuted for supposedly planning to conspiracy to cause a public nuisance, but you can't cause a public nuisance because it's on public land and property, not private land and property. If you got a political cause which is privileged, it can't be a nuisance. Now, physically blocking the road is different because you've got like rites of passage. But I think they were just going to climb up and put the banners there and that. I don't think they were actually going to physically sit in the road on that occasion. I think they were going to climb up things and display them, which you can do that. And if the drivers slow down and look at it, that's their problem. I mean, drivers used to slow down on the M1 anyway and cause backlogs just looking at something at the other side of the road, right? You know, and if you break down at the other side of the motorway and everyone slows down to look at it, you don't get prosecuted for public nuisance, right? And that's got to be equal to like any political rights that you can use, like the most protective of them, right? But, you know, Hallam didn't necessarily had to have been prosecuted or arrested. They could have just turned up, you know, at the least and moved them out of the way, right? If it was a public nuisance or if it conflicted with other people's rights, they didn't have to charge and prosecute him, right? So that's where really the privileges have been broken, because the fact that he did get arrested and he did get put in prison, right? So, you know, all these private companies and businesses and policies and all these corporate deals are actually taking over everything. And, you know, since when do you prioritise an advert over, you know, people's immediate political emergencies, which are meant to have a precedence and priority in Parliament equal to any and all business that is being done on behalf of a political party in Parliament, right? According to the Bill of Rights, which is the really, really most important part that's been undermined. So, you know, they're taking over the streets. I mean, I'm quite surprised, you know, all these adverts and things like that is all influencer and getting people to do certain things. When a military takes over a country, once it occupies a country, it controls a country by making the people do things, right? If you can make the people do things just by, you know, all the adverts and products and, you know, or you know, you could send the military into a country, right? I don't know what country, Venezuela. And then the military operation could be, right, we're going to make everyone start eating this food, right? And they could take control with the regime and say, right, you know, eat this, right, and stop eating that. And they could seize all their food and they could only leave them, like, you know, tins of beans. You'll all have to eat tins of beans. They could do that in a military operation, right? Although, you know, there's loads of, like, global law and human rights and all that. But, you know, we're talking about, you know, it's not like Putin's, you know, you just tell Putin that his whole war is against. Well, apparently they've said that they claim that Putin's war itself is legal, but. So, if you can achieve that, you know, get everyone to eat this food or that food just by, instead of like taking over the country with a military presence of tanks and men and vehicles and persons, if you can achieve that objective, you know, the same thing, like, you know, if it was everyone to eat beans or whatever and stop eating everything else, just purely by the power of suggestion or advertising or whatever, or buying all the companies and then actually just removing the ones that were making things you didn't want people to eat and only making them eat another certain thing, right? That actually, if it was done by advertising and so forth. But I think Tony Blair, I think, would probably like to do that, you know, and they're wanting to do it with controlling what people can buy and can't buy on social points. But it was them who allowed all of the McDonald's and KFCs and all of other Taco Bells to be built in the first place, which created the health problem and in the installation and building of them, right? And you might think, well, not a lot of people knew what was going on. You know, the builders are just doing the job. They just turn up for work and the councillors aren't really clued in. They just think, oh, councillors are easily sold on what is the next cool thing, right? You know, councillors are usually very, very eager to, you know, scrap things that people like and want to keep and just the next new thing, the next new thing, the next new thing, the next Starbucks, they're like, they're as influenced and sold on things as you know, people are really very susceptible to the power of suggestion, but from these big think tanks and entities and things like that. You know, Apple with their you know, Tim Cook and all the, you know, convenient Apple stuff and all these policies. And a lot of these think tank policies that get implemented, the councillors like them because it gives them a lot more power and control. But the thing with council meetings is that, you know, it's meant to be democratic, and the people, you're meant to complain. That's the thing, you know. It's there for complaints and grievances, and it's there to disagree with the council, but people are being obstructed from doing that. And it's almost like what's been happening in the local councils has been like the equivalent of when we've all been given these block and ban buttons. You know, if you can start a Facebook group and you've got all the admin controls, and then, you know, people put posts and you don't like them, you just delete them, right? That's what the local council have been given by these policies, but a lot of them are not lawful. And, you know, you've got to have the responsibility, particularly if you are getting on the council, it's democratic. So, you know, you're going to have to, if you don't like people disagreeing with you and criticising you, you're in the wrong job, really. And I think that's why a lot of councils end up with people, you know, a lot of people don't want that job on the councils. And that's why we end up with not necessarily all of the councillors being the best people that we could have or should have on the council, right? You know, because even these big executive type people, the council doesn't, well, all the executives are in the permanent jobs on the council, right? All these super executive commandy sort of type enterprise people, they work as the executives on the council, right? And they're pretty much in control of the council now. It's just like whether we can get the, you know, wheel the councillors in and get them to vote on it. You know, it's like as long as they can, you know, get the councillors in and get them to vote on it, you know, that's all they want, you know, the councillors, the vote, you know, and if they're all subscribed to Labour or Conservative, then, you know, they can get that vote rather than independent thinking people who are actually challenging these big companies on things and challenging the council and standing up for the people, but also taking into account the influences that are being affected on people as well, you know, so